Well, I guess it's a function of being human that we have an anthropomorphic view that we are at the centre of everything. And that's, clearly something that Buddhism is trying to work with. But at the same time, I think there are differences between ourselves and animals. We are clearly a highly social species, and as such, we've evolved language, so we can articulate a lot of these things. And of course, although we are now recognising that some species of animals, particularly cetaceans, do have a language, that actually we've tended to dismiss animals as not being very intelligent because they don't communicate in the same way that we do. Although obviously with animals, with some animal species, things like dogs clearly have empathy with humans, and you get empathy between dogs. So they clearly have a way of communicating that's probably based as much as, on behaviour as anything else. And in some species, of course, you've also got pheromone communication as well. We don't really know how important pheromones are in humans, but actually they may be more significant than we know.
The Black Death sent shockwaves through societies. There have been many pandemics throughout history, including many plagues caused by bubonic, pneumonic plague, cholera, Spanish influenza, and more recently COVID-19. However, the Black Death of the 14th century has been ingrained into the collective imagination of global society, yet few people really understand the origin of the illness, the impact it had across global society, especially Europe, and how it changed history. What is bubonic plague? How did it manage to kill so many people in Asia as well as at least 1/3 of the European population? How did the plague change society forever?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Medieval Europe was a dangerous place to live for many reasons. Wars, famines, and a series of less than benevolent rulers tended to make life uncomfortable and short. However, another one of these great calamities was the Black Death, arriving from Asia by Italian merchants. The tracing of the disease by infection locations and death rates was chronicled in several books by historians, which will be listed in the description box at the end of this video. But what is bubonic plague? According to Encyclopedia Britannica, bubonic plague, one of 3 clinical forms of plague, an infectious disease caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Bubonic plague is one of the 3 types of plague, the other 2 being septicemic plague and pneumonic plague. The bubonic plague is the most commonly occurring type of plague and is characterized by the appearances of buboes, swollen tender lymph nodes, typically found in the armpits and groin. The World Health Organization fact sheet states, 1 to 7 days after exposure to the bacteria, flu-like symptoms develop. These symptoms include fever, chills, diarrhea, muscle ache and contraction, headaches, and vomiting, as well as swollen and painful lymph nodes occurring in the area closest to where the bacteria enter the skin. Acral necrosis, the dark discoloration of skin, is another symptom. Occasionally, swollen lymph nodes, known as buboes, may break open. Pain at the visual points is normal, and gangrene often affects the extremities, such as fingers and toes. Also stated, bubonic plague is mainly spread by infected fleas from small animals. It may also result from exposure to the body fluids from a dead plague-infected animal. Mammals, such as rabbits, hares, and some cat species, are susceptible to bubonic plague and typically die upon contraction. In the bubonic form of plague, the bacteria enters through the skin through a flea bite and travels via the lymphatic vessels to a lymph node, causing it to swell. Diagnosis is made by finding the bacteria in the blood, sputum, or fluid from lymph nodes. Historically, the plague most affected those living in impoverished conditions due to greater exposure, poor sanitation methods and implementation, and lack of a healthy immune system due to a poor diet. This is where Europe was ready to be destroyed. Sanitation in Europe was appalling, and personal hygiene was virtually unheard of. Another problem that was beyond the control of the populations was the fact that after 400 years of global warming that created longer, warmer summers and allowed for more food to be grown, the population of Europe increased exponentially. However, the years before the 14th century had experienced a global cooldown from 1315 and 1322 that caused crop failures and massive famines for 7 years, and also created bad weather for the next 2 decades. After the temperature dropped dramatically and less food could be grown, and as less food could feed the larger population, people became malnourished, and in turn created children who were born unable to fight diseases. Infant mortality rates soared, and those who lived to adulthood were not as healthy as their grandparents. Another problem was the constant wars and the impact upon the people. Edward II of England had his tax collectors confiscate civilians' grain and animal fodder to feed his soldiers and, like other European rulers, forced the peasants into his conscript army, who then were unable to farm the land. Also, when the plague hit, the death toll among the peasants who did the farming was so high, there were few areas to be cultivated for the following harvests. In addition, a parasitic worm killed about 70% of the sheep necessary for England's wool trade, but the disastrous effect was already laid out when the sheep were given grazing on land that could have been farmed for agriculture, exacerbating the process and assisting in the coming famine. Scientists have identified several problems contributing to the overall decline in the health of people around the world. One was the increase in sea ice, which helped cool down the air and water. The long winters, increased rains, and lower temperatures started what is called the end of the medieval warm period. Other issues were the volcanic eruptions of Samalas, Mount Rinjani, in Lombok, Lesser Sunda Islands in 1257, and Quilatoa in the Andes, Northern Volcanic Zone in 1280, as being two factors, along with many other lesser eruptions, in assisting in the downslope of global temperatures affecting weather and agriculture for the next century in varying degrees of severity. The volcanic ash entered the Earth's atmosphere, blanketing the globe and creating a mild nuclear winter that created a cool-down, as well as preventing maximum sunlight and long summers necessary for agricultural production. The northern European countries who always had short growing seasons were probably hit the hardest. The incessant rains in Europe started in 1315 and continued particularly in the summers for 7 years. Global temperatures dropped from 1.1 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit depending upon location until about 1352 when the pandemic was at its height. Then, in a weather reversal, the climate warmed considerably, lasting into 1353, creating droughts that would not allow for crops to grow in any case, furthering the famines, especially in France and England. But where did the plague come from? Arab historians Ibn al-Wardi and Amal-Krizi wrote that the Black Death originated in Mongolia, and this is supported by Chinese records, which also show a massive outbreak in Mongolia in the early 1330s that affected China, Egypt, and Southwest Asia, including the Arabian Peninsula and throughout all of these Islamic caliphates. Researchers in 2022 provided evidence that the plague had originated near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan. At that time, Mongols had cut the Silk Road, the main trade route between China and Europe, which actually prevented the spread of the disease from eastern Russia to western Europe, at least for a while. However, the Black Death may have been spread as a result of the European epidemic that began with the siege of Kaffa in the Crimea, when the Mongols attacked the Italian trading port on the Black Sea. It is apparent that the Mongols brought the plague along on their conquests. The European traders were more than likely infected when Mongol General Jani catapulted diseased corpses over the walls of towns and villages to spread the pestilence inside the cities. The infected traders and sailors who survived departed on their ships and returned to Italy after a siege of almost 2 years, landing primarily in the ports of Venice, Genoa, and in Messina in Sicily in August through October 1347. The best chronicled event was when 12 ships docked in Messina. Many of the men aboard those ships were found dead, and those still alive exhibited all the outward signs of the illness that would become infamous. The rats that accompanied the ships also carried the fleas that in turn carried the disease, and that was passed along to the crew and any livestock. The future of Europe and the world had been set in motion. The effect struck North Africa, but this was a blessing in disguise, as the Muslim positions were not restricted by adhering to strict confining religious doctrines, as were the Europeans. They studied the sick, were able to examine the dead through autopsies, and isolated the possible origins. They also discovered methods for successfully treating the disease, such as properly lancing the buboes in a sanitary fashion to safely drain the poison without expanding the infection, and applying specific liniments to reduce the swelling, as well as ensuring the infected patients were fed high-protein foods and kept hydrated to strengthen their immune systems. Meanwhile, Europeans relied upon superstitious practices such as burning aromatic herbs and bathing in rose water or vinegar and prayer. They could not understand why such a pestilence had struck them, and many believed that it was a punishment from God for their not being proper Christians. No one was spared due to social rank. Peasants died, as did royalty. such as the daughter of King Edward III of England, Joan, who was betrothed to Peter of Castile, son of Maria of Portugal and Alfonso XI of Castile, and died on 2 September 1348 in Bordeaux while she was en route to be married. Paranoid of the pandemic, even Pope Clement VI attributed the plague to divine wrath. When the cities ran out of ground for cemeteries, he had to consecrate the entire Rhone River area so that it could be considered holy ground and bodies could be thrown into it. Others decided that the evil had been unleashed by others to attack Christianity, such as the Jews, who were easy scapegoats. People, whether Christians, foreigners, travelers, lepers, or Jews, were denounced as witches or warlocks who brought the disease. Those persons unaffected were deemed in league with Lucifer and were often hanged or burned. Those who were being persecuted often fled to other parts of Europe, carrying the Black Death with them without even knowing it. Sometimes homes were burnt to the ground, with those inside killed if they were believed to have the plague. As a result of the many persecutions, the Jews fled to Poland, where King Casimir III, seeing their value, gave them sanctuary, thereby creating the largest Jewish society in the world until the end of World War II. To his credit, Clement issued 2 papal bulls in 1348, one on July 6 and one on September 26, the last being named the Quamvis Perfidium, which condemned the violence and said those who blamed the plague on the Jews had been seduced by that liar, the devil. Clement also said that it cannot be true that the Jews, by such a heinous crime, are the cause or occasion of the plague, because through many parts of the world the same plague, by the hidden judgment of God, has afflicted and afflicts the Jews themselves and many other races who have never lived alongside them. He urged the clergy to take action to protect the Jews, as he had done. Another answer to the problem was the creation of the flagellants, religious zealots who traveled from town to town and engaged in public displays of penance and punishment. They would beat themselves and one another with heavy leather straps studded with sharp pieces of metal, while the townspeople looked on. For over a month, the flagellants repeated this ritual 3 times a day. Then they would move on to the next town and begin the process over again to purge the scourge from their world. Estimates vary that between 25 million and 100 million deaths worldwide, with at least 1/3 of Europe's population being eliminated. The actual losses in Asia and Africa will never be known. One man in particular, Guy de Chauliac, the personal physician to Pope Clement VI, was the preeminent surgeon of the Middle Ages. His study of wounds and disease was not limited to the myopic restrictions of Christian teachings mandated by the Church in Rome. He even studied some of the Arab texts that he could find to compare the various methods. He was the first among all Europeans to describe the 2 different predominant types of plague, pneumonic and bubonic, both of which had occurred in outbreaks in Avignon. The French biologist Alexander Yersin discovered this specific germ at the end of the 19th century, hence the disease Yersinia bearing his name. But during the plague, more lucid people decided on a policy of containment and were able to slow its spread by keeping arriving sailors in isolation aboard their ships until it was clear that they were not carrying the disease. They also created social distancing that relied upon isolation to slow the spread of the disease, much like what was thought to be the best approach to COVID-19. But what were the long-term effects of the Black Death? Well, for one, it was a massive paradigm shift for the Catholic Church on many levels. First, mass graves became the norm due to the high numbers of dead, especially among the poor. Burial of individuals in consecrated ground, such as in church or monastic cemeteries, was rare, and usually only given to the clergy and nobles, who were often buried in sarcophagi. Due to the plague, new cemeteries were created to handle the overflow, and we live with public cemeteries to this day. Research has shown that even those persons buried in mass graves were interred with a certain degree of care and reverence. As a result, actual cemeteries were created for the burial of commoners as a way to respect the dead. Second, the economic impact of the plague. Perhaps hardest hit was the banking industry. which was based upon loans and payments from international trade, which took a great hit as it was mostly based upon agriculture and ships to move cargoes. Third, depopulation eliminated the weakest of the population, only allowing the physically strongest or luckiest to survive if infected. Lifespans increased and people grew taller and fitter in later decades. Archaeological excavations prove this point when dating the graves from the Black Death through later centuries. This natural selection process helped start a healthier and more robust European society. Although future such plagues would return, the death rates would be much lower. Fourth, the loss of so many people meant that there was more land available to grow crops and feed a smaller population. Labor became a premium, and free men, unlike serfs who were bound to the land, could roam and take their agricultural experience with them and earn a living. The result of this shortage saw the creation of the tenant farmer, or sharecropper, whereas a landowner who did not have serfs, and after serfdom was abolished, would rent out some land to a farmer who would live on and work the land for a wage or share of the crop harvest revenue. After so many people died, serfs were sometimes free to move to other estates that provided better conditions and receive top pay for their work. Fifth, the rise of the practice of law was also a result. The wealthy who owned large amounts of land needed a will to ensure that their heirs would receive their property without question. Prior to the Black Death and during, wealthy people who died without a will often saw their property taken by the monarchs to be redistributed or taken by the church. Hence the start of using the last will and testament precautions. Sixth, the need for highly skilled labor saw the expansion of the guilds, such as stonemasons, cloth makers, artisans, for example, who could now negotiate their labor for money rather than simply be forced to do such work by nobles or the church. There were two main types of guilds: merchant guilds for traders and craft guilds for skilled artisans. The guilds would become more powerful both economically and politically, establishing work standards, and would be the genesis of what would later become labor unions. Seventh, the rise of religious adherence saw the building of more churches and cathedrals, requiring the guilds, and the increase in young men and women entering into the monastic professions. The reality of death had left a deep impact that many people felt, and they adopted a lifestyle that would protect their souls. The Black Death would be followed by many other outbreaks of different types of pandemics over the centuries, but they would be smaller in scope and none would have the impact of the event from 1347 to 1352, especially in Europe.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.
Bring out your dead! 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 Ninepence. Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
Here's one.
Ninepence.
I'm not dead.
What?
Nothing. Here's your ninepence. I'm not dead.
Here. He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not.
He isn't.
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill. I'm getting better. No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
Oh, I can't take him like that. It's against regulations.
I don't want to go on the car. Oh, don't be such a baby.
I can't take him.
I feel fine. Well, do us a favour.
I can't.
Well, can you hang around a couple of minutes? He won't be long.
No, I've got to go to Robinson's. They've lost 9 today.
Well, when's your next run?
Thursday.
You think I'll go for a walk? You're not fooling anyone, you know. Look, Isn't there something you can do?
I feel happy. I feel happy.
Ah, thanks very much.
Not at all. See you on Thursday.
Right, right.
Who's that then? I don't know. Must be a king. Why? He hasn't got shit all over him.
Old woman! Man! Man, sorry. What knight lives in that castle over there?
I'm 37.
What?
I'm 37. I'm not old.
Well, I can't just call you man. You could say Dennis. I didn't know you were called Dennis.
Wait, then bother.
In 1381, the peasants were revolting. Truly disgusting. On an unrelated topic, there was actually a peasants' revolt in 1381. It began in Essex as a response to the harsh economic demands of Parliament and was one of the most significant uprisings in Europe during the medieval period. A national movement of people that spread as far as York and Scarborough in the northeast and over to Somerset in the southwest of England. Previous uprisings had always been led by noblemen, ambitious to overthrow the out-of-touch government and seize power for themselves. This time it was different. The so-called Peasants' Revolt was led by a group of commoners, men like Wat Tyler, John Ball, and Jack Straw. A group of men and women from all walks of life who wanted to radically change English society rather than seek out personal advancement. Let's travel back in time and try and understand why the peasants revolted in 1381. Welcome to Medieval Madness. The instability of a boy king. King Edward III had died 4 years earlier. His eldest son and heir, the popular Black Prince, died before his father, and so his grandson Richard II had succeeded to the throne instead. But Richard was only 10 years old, just a boy king, leaving him dependent on his uncle John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster. The 100 Years' War, which actually went on for 116 years, had been raging since 1337. Tensions between the crowns of England and France over territory went back centuries, with English kings rightly or wrongly making claim to the French throne. This made it a major source of ongoing conflict between the two monarchies, often punctuated by a series of brief periods of peace. Henry V famously won the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 and actually became King of France. By 1381, King Richard was still only 14 years old. Having no official role didn't matter to his uncle John of Gaunt. The authoritarian was unpopular and feared, but now being the eldest surviving son of the late King Edward, he was the most dominant noble in England and the real power behind the throne. Royal authority was dependent on the backing of the English nobility. The House of Lancaster had over 30 castles and a private army of 4,000 men. With Gaunt at its head, it therefore had great sway over the governance of the kingdom. The Church. The influence of the Church was everywhere, dominating daily life. Their magnificent buildings overshadowed both town and country. All citizens were legally obligated to give 1/10 of their wealth to the Church, either in cash from their wages or by rent in kind from grain, wool, or other goods. The Church also demanded extra payments too, such as on feast days or for mortuary fines when a parishioner died. All of this money had made the Church very wealthy, with some abbots and bishops living extravagant and immoral lifestyles. In the late 14th century, this caused all parts of English society to question the Church's position and whether it should relinquish its wealth. But the courtiers around young King Richard, including his mother and John of Gaunt, protected the church. Whether this was because they genuinely believed in its sanctity or because they wanted a contribution towards the war effort is debatable. Taxes and wars. The Black Death had arrived in England in 1348, wiping out up to half of the population, leaving death, devastation, and a time of real social upheaval in its wake. Many of those who survived found that their financial circumstances much improved. A shortage of manpower created greater opportunities for those at the bottom of the social ladder, who were able to demand higher wages, negotiate better terms of employment, and even purchase more land. But the government brought in sumptuary laws to not only bar labourers from getting higher wages, but also to stop them wearing high-quality clothing and restrict their diet. Despite these restrictions, a new middle class of merchants, artisans, and even farmers were created. An ambitious class that had become numerate and literate, and were enjoying both physical and social mobility. The government, employers, and private landowners all sought to exploit this newfound wealth that had been created by what they believed were their inferiors. The people of England were heavily taxed, and the money collected had been spent on what was now seen as pointless military assaults, which did nothing to improve the lives of the people at home. In the 1370s, a new community tax was brought in that saw a levy on every parish in England and Wales. Areas with the densest population were most severely hit, such as East Anglia. Suffolk saw its contribution increase by a shocking 103%. And then in January of 1377, the government ushered in the first poll tax. Everyone had to pay, the only exceptions being children under 14 and beggars. Now, the people were already becoming restless, but things only got worse. Between the years of 1377 and 1381, 3 poll taxes were brought in that had to be paid regardless of status or wealth. The commissioners that were sent out to enforce these payments were ruthless in taking the money, being told to collect it by all manner ways and means. For the nobleman, the extra levy was relatively painless, but for the ordinary working man, the farmers and tradesmen, it was financially crippling. And as if that wasn't enough, the French were also launching raids on the south coast of England, and the people were becoming increasingly afraid of an invasion. Instability, taxes, church corruption, a failing war, and measures aimed at suppression of the people, it was a perfect storm, and a revolt was inevitable. In London, in the April of 1381, the commissioners were unable to collect the taxes without it causing dangerous agitation amongst the population. Then a collector was attacked in Oxfordshire by a group of assailants. The aptly named William Payable was tortured and beaten. And he wasn't the last. Random outbreaks of resistance began, especially in Kent and the other counties surrounding London, before spreading to East Anglia and beyond. By the beginning of June, the rebels were organising their uprising and preparing to move on London. Flying the banner of St. George and led by their captain, a man named Wat Tyler, the target of the Kentish rebels was not young King Richard, but rather the faction of noble families around him. On the 2nd of June, the renegades swore allegiance to their king, wanting to save him from the harmful influence of John of Gaunt. The rebellion was quite well organised, and all over the country men travelled on horseback to different settlements spreading news of the rebellion. Groups began to destroy manorial records which chronicled the unfree station of many of the peasants. The leaders. Not much is known about 2 of the revolt's leaders, neither Walter Tyler, although his name is synonymous with the uprising, or his comrade Jack Straw. Both men seem to emerge from complete obscurity, and there is little known about their background or motives. Some historians even argue that the 2 men are the same person, as many of the organisers used pseudonyms. Tyler led the rebels to Canterbury on the 10th of June, there they sacked the Archbishop's palace. Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Chancellor, was one of King Richard's closest advisors, and responsible for suggesting a new poll tax just the year before. A tax which ensured that the poor paid more than the rich. After destroying documents and freeing prisoners from the jail, the rebels moved on to London and camped on Blackheath on the 12th of June. It was there that John Ball gave one of his most famous sermons on freedom and equality. It's thought that around 30,000 rebels marched onto London. The Lollard priest John Ball had a central role as the spiritual voice of the people. Already imprisoned for his belief in equality, Ball preached his criticism of the lords with their extravagant clothing, fine houses, and overindulgence, in contrast to the commoners who were working for the lord's benefit and receiving little in return. Ball whipped up public opinion against those in power and helped to motivate an already agitated populace. After being arrested and imprisoned for sedition, he was released by the rebels as they made their way towards London. On entering the city on the 13th, the rebels caused panic amongst the nobility. King Richard, his mother, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, the son of John of Gaunt, and other councillors retreated to the Tower of London for safety. The Savoy, John of Gaunt's luxury palace, unrivaled in splendour and nobility, was razed to the ground. But the Duke of Lancaster was lucky to be in Scotland negotiating a truce, and escaped with his life. At only 14 years old, and against the advice of his council, Richard met with Tyler and the rebels. At the first meeting outside the city walls at Mile End, he promised them a charter of liberties including the abolition of forced labour, cheap land, and free trade. Taking advantage of the king's absence, other rebels broke into the tower. It's a mystery how they got into the heavily fortified castle, but they were probably let in by sympathisers. After capturing Chancellor Sudbury and the Lord High Treasurer Robert Hales, they were taken to Tower Hill and beheaded. Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, was lucky. He managed to escape capture and later went on to seize the throne for himself, becoming King Henry IV. With his uncle bargaining with the Scots and his armies spread out across Wales, France and Scotland, King Richard II, fearing for his life, spent the night in hiding. Despite his fear, Richard rode out to meet Tyler and his rebels again the next day, at Smithfield, a large open area outside of the city walls. Tyler was brought before the king. When asked why they would not go home, Tyler replied that they had further concessions and would not leave until they were met. There is confusion as to what happened next, but there was an altercation between Tyler and the Lord Mayor of London, and Tyler was attacked and killed. Many of the rebels began to ready their weapons, but the young king galloped towards the protesters shouting, "I am your leader," and demanded that they left the field immediately. Unbelievably, Richard was able to talk the crowd down, the mob dispersed, and the uprising was crushed. The legacy. As we all know, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 has created a world without such barbaric laws where the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. Just kidding. Richard was unable to keep his promises due to his limited power in Parliament. He claimed he had made them under duress, and they were therefore not valid anyway. Those named as ringleaders were executed. Although the poll tax was revoked, the peasants were forced to return to their earlier lives controlled by either lord or church. Not for the first time did the ordinary people of England learn how foolish it was to trust their rulers. John Ball fled to Coventry but was arrested. At trial he was found guilty, and unwilling to repent of his treason, he was hanged, drawn and quartered on the 15th of July in St Albans, whilst Richard watched. Nicknamed the Mad Priest of Kent, his head was displayed on London Bridge, along with that of Wat Tyler, whose body was publicly decapitated and his head was carried on top of a pole through the city first. Although the rebels' demands were not met, some historians believe that the Peasants' Revolt is a defining moment in our history. Over 60,000 people are thought to have been involved in the rebellion. By November of that year, over 1,500 rebels were killed, including its leaders. But in just over 1 month, this resolute band of people had fought for the rights of the working man, for freedom and equality, fundamental principles that are at the heart of every democracy. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you enjoy the content, as we do release a new video every Friday. Cheers!
Chapter 1. The wolves came down to the farm last night. They spoke to me of freedom. I lay by the last of the fire with my 4 feet turned towards the embers, and the last of the heat warming my belly. I did not listen. Chapter 2. Old bitch looks ready to drop her pups. That's Rufus talking. He bends down and rubs his hard hand down from the base of my skull to the root of my tail. Again. Comfort looks my way and smiles. I wonder where she'll hide this time. Why won't she stay beside the fire, Rufus? She knows what's best for her. Rufus is a good man. Chapter 3. Days and nights we stayed up in the bracken pile, curled round one another, while I gave suck and licked and settled squabbles. They fed and slept and fed and squabbled, and I watched their small, sleek bodies plumping up with milk. Their eyes were shut, their small heads pushed into my flank, muzzles butting, jaws working hard in the rhythm of life, which is, at first, no more than suck and swallow. I went down by night to drink at the trough. Comfort put bread and milk for me inside the byre door, and now and then a bone. She knew where I was, though she pretended not to. Then the cold bit hard, the last cold of winter, and the trough froze solid right down to the bottom. The hens stuck their feathers up, and the goat complained. Only the sheep seemed not to feel it. No more. Chapter 4. The soldiers burst in, cursed Rufus for his slowness, pushed Comfort up against the wall and tied her hands, beat Rufus, shouted at the twins to hold their noise, and kicked me clear across the room. The priest watched it all with a smile on his face. Behind him stood Will Cudweed, the miller. Grindicott. Chapter 5. We were not, nor would ever be, truly wild. I had known fireside, bed and bone, Rufus's pat and his soft look. All of my life up until then had been lived in the village. But still I was no hand-fed house dog. I knew what to do and how to do it. And the summer had started, which brings easy living. I carried Fleabane curled limp from my jaws, bouncing and swinging up the hill above the village. Halfway to the top, there was a pile of rocks that jutted out from under an earth mound. It smelt a bit of fox, but there were none there at that time. I crept in underneath the rocks, with Fleabane still held safely in my jaws. A passage led back right inside the mound. There was more rock in there, and dry white bones and a spear and helmet, with the skull still inside it, all so old that not the faintest whiff of people hung about them. There was a little pile of soft ash near the helmet. Something had burned there long ago. It made a smooth bed for my Fleabane, and I laid him down. He wanted me to stay with him, but I was hungry. There was a rabbit warren down at the bottom of the hill on Great House land. Dawn was coming, when the rabbits would come out to crop and nibble. I caught one, snapped its neck, and felt its warm flesh and blood bringing me life and strength. I caught another one and carried it back to my new home. I let Fleabane nose its fur, though he was too young to eat it. When I had fed and washed Fleabane, I left him sleeping and went to lie in the mouth of our den. It was a strange and lonely feeling, watching the sun come up, hearing the birds wake, seeing the cows at pasture below. Towards midday, I saw what I'd been watching for. A group of soldiers with 4 prisoners between them, Rufus and Comfort and 2 neighbours. Edie was not with them. Wat and Will and Alice might still be safe with her. I woke Fleabane and told him I must go away, but not for long, and that he must stay in the lair and not for any reason put his small brown nose outside it. There was still 1 rabbit leg for him to play with. I wanted to run straight to Rufus, to hear his voice, to feel his hand on my head, to lick Comfort's brown hand, but I feared the soldiers, so I sneaked along, belly to the ground, dodging behind bushes, keeping low in ditches. Rufus did not see me. If he had seen me and called, I would have run to him. The soldiers took him to the stables in the yard of the great house and pushed him and Comfort and the other 2, all 4, into one stall. They shut and locked the doors behind them. 1 soldier stood outside. The priest came and gabbled some rigmarole outside the stable door. I doubt if they could hear him inside. He spoke of treason and rebellion and King Richard's men. He spoke of law courts and execution. Beaton, the miller's wife, watched with tears running down her face. There is an old dog, Filbert, in the great house yard, and I knew that he would watch the stable and bring me news, so I went back to Fleabane. On the way I saw Humble hunting along the edge of the village. She spat at me. She has no loyalty at all. Chapter 6. Fleabane and I continued in the same den through the early summer, and I began to teach him how to hunt. We started with nestlings and young rabbits. Rufus always loved to watch me teach a young dog. People would beg him for a pup of mine. Will Cudweed offered to grind our corn free for one season in exchange for 2 strong pups of mine, but Rufus wouldn't trade. That man would beat the sense out of the... Chapter 7. Summer was hot. The sky was hard harebell blue above our hill. Down on the great meadow the grass turned yellow, and the river dwindled. Water flowed slow and oozy between great clumps of meadowsweet and rosebay willow herb. The kingcups, over long before the end of spring, set bristly brown stars in place of yellow petals, and the waterbirds grew plump. I do not much like coot. It tastes of weed and river and feels slimy on the tooth. Moorhen is better, though a little stringy. Neither can match the rich, fat taste of duck. I often thought of hen, but would not take one in case it brought the village down upon us. By now Fleabane knew all the country round our lair, down by the river, and all about the outskirts of the village. One night of a full summer moon, I thought it time to show him something new, and took him up into the forest. He ran beside me with his brown nose picking up news here and there, his small neat ears swivelling to every night-time murmur, and his fine feathered tail bent like a bow over his back. At the top of our hill, rock and grass and heather changed to bracken. A few great oaks stood alone along the margin of the wood. Behind them, hundreds upon hundreds of great beech trees stretched away into the rustling darkness. Sometimes we'd find a clearing where great trees had died, making space for small new hazel bushes, honeysuckle and foxgloves, their white or purple flowers over now, pointing tall seed heads to the velvet sky. Deer jumped away from us, leaving swathes of rich, warm scent behind them on the air. Owls floated over, letting fall traces of mouse smell, such as I used to recognize on Humble's fur. Squirrels, with something of a ratty smell, twitched in their sleep above our heads. Fish rose in small dark pools to suck down moths trapped on the surface of the water. High in a silver birch, a nightingale sang and sang. Fleabane had not heard bird-song like it, so we stopped a while to listen. As we stood silent underneath the tree, an old wild sow trundled by, followed by 16 piglets. Glorious they smelt, sweet, ripe, salty, but soft. I could see Fleabane drooling. He looked at me with only the slowest, slightest movement of his head, and asked with his eyes if he should take one. "No," I told him, drawing down my eyebrows. After they had gone and he was pestering me with his "Why not?" I told him how a sow can rip a dog's throat out with one snick of those curved iron teeth. How once she shuts her jaws on anyone or anything, it's finished. Dead. Piglets you take only if they're alone. After the sow and her piglets, we met something that smelt altogether less enticing. There's nothing smells like people. Each person has their own smell, as do we. But you can say, as I told Fleabane, that people always smell of more things, more of a mixture of things than other creatures do. I recognized the smell of this one easily. It was the ragman, who had watched the preacher and counted the people by moonlight from deep in the wood. He smelt of sickness and hunger and desolation. His face, when he came into our view, was more than half hidden by an old rag, black with dirt, that he had wound about his head. What we could see, his forehead and the bridge of his nose, looked scaly and discoloured. A bell hung round his neck, but it was stuffed with moss so that it wouldn't ring. He held a staff in his right hand, which lacked 2 fingers, and he was very lame. His feet were bound in strips of leather, and his garment was a dirty piece of sacking tied about his waist. All people fear lepers, and they in turn dare not enter the village. If they tried, the villagers would stone them out again. Comfort once put a piece of bread out in the hedge for one poor wretch she had seen creeping by, and Rufus scolded her. He said even to breathe the air they breathed might turn her into one of them. Fleabane and I watched him in silence as he hobbled lonely down the path that led to the village. There were other people in the forest too. We found an old campfire, and the dregs of ale and urine splashed against the bole of a tree, and bones, some with strips of venison still clinging to them. A pile of feathers showed where someone had plucked pigeons. There were the remains of rough shelters, and the scent of 2 dogs, one large, one small. Fleabane wanted to track them. He wanted bones and company. But I could feel dawn rising, and I had a bad feeling about the sick man. We left the forest and tracked him back to Will Cudweed's mill. Chapter 8. We reached the mill a little before sunrise. Will Cudweed was nowhere to be seen, but Beaton, his wife, was out in the yard throwing scraps to the hens. I could hear 2 of his daughters in the barn milking goats, and one of his sons was kicking Avens out of his kennel to go hunting. Not that Avens knows how to hunt. Lights burned in the mill where the boys who worked for Cudweed were sorting sacks for the day's milling. It was an ordinary morning, but the place, as usual, was thick and heavy with all kinds of badness. We only ever went there when Rufus had corn to grind. The boys Cudweed kept to work in the mill were always black and blue. Will Cudweed could not talk to a child without a stick. Comfort always said she'd starve before she let Wat or Will work for him. "Beaton is my own sister, but what can any woman do with a husband like Cudweed?" she'd say, and Rufus agreed. Cudweed was the same with any creature. He must be always twisting an arm or a tail, wrenching an ear, yanking and cursing, and always with a stick in his hand. I sat under the hedge with Fleabane behind me, silent and still as any stone, for all he was so young. Presently the ragman came shuffling out from the back of the barn, with Will Cudweed behind him. The miller kept his distance and held a cloth wrung out in vinegar pressed over his nose and mouth to ward off the disease. He threw a twist of cloth down onto the ground and stood back, grinning, as the ragman bent and scuffled for it, then hauled himself back upright, or as near upright as he could get. He fumbled the twist open, counted what was hid inside, spat and held out his hand for more. Cudweed laughed and shook his head. "You'll get no more from me, you lousy scab," he said, "unless it be the thick end of my stick." "'Tis worth more to you, what I've to tell. You know it is," the ragman whined. "I don't know till you've told me," Cudweed answered, "which if you don't do double quick, I'll set my dog on you." The ragman turned his face away from Cudweed. He looked so wretched, I could only pity him. Fleabane and I trotted off down the lane, away from Cudweed and his stench of cruelty, and I did not hear what news the ragman told the miller. That night I sat alone outside our den. Fleabane slept within. I looked down into the valley where the last of the sun lit the roofs of the houses, and I thought of dogs down there who still had homes. I thought of Rufus, stretched in the wet straw of the great house lock-up, and of Comfort beside him. I felt as low and lonely as a dog can feel. A howl rose in me, and I stretched my muzzle to the moon and let it out, wild and cold, across the green hollows, down to the village, away to the wood. Another came, and then another. Little Fleabane crept out of the den behind me, lay himself down close along my flank, and sang with me. Down in the village, Filbert answered. Over the hill, Swart called back. Far in the forest, a deep voice, one I did not know yet, joined our song. Presently we were quiet. Fleabane snored softly by my ear. I dropped my muzzle to my paws and stared down at the village. 1 or 2 lights began to glimmer softly out of doors and windows. Smoke drifted on the summer air. People were cooking. Dogs were lying by firesides, waiting for scraps. And then I saw, down in our own window, a flickering yellow light. Someone had lit the fire. Smoke rose from gaps between the thatch. Light showed in the doorway as somebody looked out. Just for a moment I felt my hackles rise. Then I was on my feet, barking and barking at the moon, at the valley, at Fleabane, at anything and anyone who would hear and share my joy. We tumbled down the hillside so fast, Fleabane went nose over tail 6 times, rolling and bounding and bouncing like a rolled-up hedgehog on a bank. And I rollicked along beside him and in front of him and all around him, shouting my good news to the night as no wise dog should ever do. Oh, but I wasn't wise. I was joyful. I scraped under the gate with Fleabane behind me and galloped across the yard to where the door to home stood open, with fire glow and food smell calling us. In at the door we pushed, the 2 of us, to Comfort and Rufus, as we thought, to home and welcome, to loving kindness, to fireside, bed and bone, and found instead Lupus, the miller's son, sitting by the fire with his new wife Vetchen at his side. They looked at us and nodded. Vetchen jumped up and kicked the door shut at our backs. Lupus stood up more slowly, taking off his belt. Chapter 9. "I thought you'd come sniffing back, old dog," Lupus said. "Brought her pup and all," Vetchen smiled. "You take the big one, Lupus. I'll see to the little one." Fleabane tucked in behind me. We put our tails to the door and bared our teeth at the grasping hands that reached towards us. I heard Fleabane yelp as Vetchen caught him by the scruff and yanked a twist of rope over his ears and down round his neck. Then Lupus's heavy leather belt struck me a blow across the ribs that knocked my breath away and stopped me thinking clearly. In the split second of my muddle, he dropped a strap over my nose, pulled it tight so I could not bite him, collared me and dragged me out into the yard. He hauled me over to the byre and tied me in a corner there. He aimed a last heavy kick at my ribs and stood watching me with a satisfied look on his face. "Your master never would sell us one of your pups. Your master was a fool, old dog. We'll have the pick of any litter now, and we'll not give your fool master a pot of ale." I rubbed my nose along the floor, trying to get the strap off. Lupus shook his head. "You'll keep that on tonight," he said. "Won't do you no harm. You've got a thing or 2 to learn." It is a terrible thing for a dog to wear a muzzle. It leaves you at the mercy of anything that happens by. You can neither bite, nor bark, nor howl, nor eat, nor drink. Worst of all is the fear that you may somehow not be able to go on breathing if you cannot get the thing off. Rufus muzzled me once, to cut a thorn out of my paw. He took it off as soon as ever the thorn was out. That night was a long one. Fleabane stayed shut indoors, and I did not know what was happening to him. He began to howl round midnight. Then came Lupus's voice, angry, and Fleabane crying out, small but determined. I fought my muzzle and my rope, but could not rid myself of either. Indoors, Vetchen began to shout. "Leave off, Lupus! He's a young dog! Too much of that will ruin him!" The house door opened and Fleabane scrabbled out into the yard. Then he was pressed against my side, in the darkness. All night he lay pressed close against me. Every now and then I woke to feel his warm tongue working round the muzzle, which had bitten into my nose and drawn blood when I fought it. He comforted me greatly, and though I could not lick his wounds, I comforted him too, as best I could. When Vetchen came out to us in the morning and saw Fleabane by my side, she bent, I think, to stroke him. But I growled, and that angered her, and she took him by the collar and dragged him indoors. I heard her telling Lupus not to take my muzzle off. Over the course of the day, which was a hot one, my thirst grew into a torment, and my jaws swelled up on each side of the strap Lupus had knotted round them. I was forced to dirty all my bedding, a thing I'd never done since I was smaller than Fleabane. Fleabane did not come out to see me, which meant I knew that he could not. He howled sometimes and was beaten for it. I could not even answer him. In the evening Lupus came and took the muzzle off. He untied me and let me go. The first thing I did was drink from the trough. The water tasted cleaner and better than any I had ever drunk from pool or spring or river. Then I crossed the yard and put my nose to the crack under the door. Vetchen was cooking. Lupus was drinking the dregs of the beer Comfort had brewed last autumn. Fleabane was there, and Humble too. Vetchen came to the door to throw some water out, and saw me there. "Shall I let the bitch in, Lupus?" she called. "Might as well," he answered. The beer had changed him, as it does change people, and he sounded pleased with life. "She's our bitch now." "Unless your father wants her. He wants the puppy. Says we can put the bitch to his dog later on. That way there'll be more pups to sell." Avens, I thought. No, thank you. I put my head round the door. Fleabane lay by the fire. There was no sign of Grindikob, who had run out when the soldiers came, but a strong, sweet smell of meat bubbled from Vetchen's pot. Fleabane still wore his collar of rope, and I could tell by the way he held his head that his neck hurt. He jumped up, forgetting he was tied to the trestle, and tried to run to me. Humble watched our greeting superciliously from her place on the windowsill. The meat smell doubled my hunger. Fleabane looked as though he had been fed. Tomorrow I must find food for myself. I lay down and shut my eyes. I could smell Lupus leaning over me. His hand fumbled my ears, then patted my neck. I would have liked to sink my teeth into his flesh, but I am not a fool. A dog cannot hunt in a muzzle. I should have bitten him anyway, because in the morning he put the muzzle on again. He let me drink first, but he did not give me anything to eat. Then Vetchen tied me back up in the byre. I did not see Fleabane all day. Lupus came out that night, took off the muzzle, gave me half a rabbit, and went indoors. It was a better night, because he did not put the muzzle on again, and the rabbit gave me strength. I guessed Fleabane had gone to Miller Cudweed's house. In the morning, I learnt why Lupus had kept me muzzled and half-starved for 2 nights and 2 days, and then gave me rabbit. After his morning bread and cheese, I had nothing. He picked up Rufus's bow and arrows and whistled to me. Had I been anything but ravenous and weak, I would not have gone to him. I was Rufus's dog, but I was hungry, so I went. Chapter 10. We crossed the great field where several families were already working, some mowing barley, some cutting wheat with sickles. Cocks and sheaves of both were being laid in rows to dry. Most of the men gave Lupus angry looks when they saw him with me. Everyone knew his father, Cudweed, had taken Rufus's house, saying he owed money to the mill. They weren't surprised to see me with Lupus, but they were angry. Nobody greeted Lupus. Nobody patted me. I saw Filbert from the great house messing around by the river, and he saw me, but we avoided one another. I was ashamed of Lupus, and Filbert was afraid of him, so we went our separate ways. I thought of Rufus in the lock-up. I thought of the ragman, and as I jogged along at Lupus's heel, head down, tail lower, I knew how he felt, cut off from everything that should have been familiar, forever a stranger. Gradually everything left my mind except the thought of how to get food into my stomach. On the edge of the woodland, Lupus stopped and took Rufus's bow off his shoulder. He looked down at me. "You've got a choice, old dog," he said. "You can hunt for me, or you can starve. If you don't hunt, you're no good to me. What's no good to me, don't eat." Before long I picked up the scent of a hare in the long grass. It's a strong scent, an unmistakable, rich, gamey scent that will drive you mad even if your belly's full. Empty, afraid, alone. I found it twice as powerful. I tracked it down into a little dip and up the other side, then waited for Lupus to catch up with me. I showed him where the hare was hiding, and when I was sure he'd understood, crept forward, paused, looked back, checked that he had his arrow ready, and ran in. The hare jumped up on its big, muscled hind legs and leapt away. Lupus's arrow caught it in the side and slowed it for me. I bowled it over, broke its neck, and took it back to him. Why did I hunt for Lupus? Because I am not, nor ever will be, truly wild. Because I have known fire, bed, and bone. Because I am a hunting dog, a dog who must work with a man. Because I wanted to live, not die with a muzzle round my jaws. Lupus took the hare from me and cut a little slit in one of its back legs. He threaded the other leg through the slit and hung the creature on his belt. He did not pat me or praise me as Rufus would have done, but that night he fed me. I got the bones of the hare and some mouldy bread. No more, but it kept me alive. The next day we hunted again. The first time they forgot to tie me properly, I was away to Fleabane. I found him chained to an old broken barrel that lay on its side in the mill-house yard. He was thinner, and his coat was rough. He had no shade, and his neck was chafed where his collar rubbed him, but there was water he could reach in the trough, and he was alive. Avens bounced out of the barn at me with a chorus of insults. I put my tail up and my ears forward. I lifted my lips back off my teeth. Avens did the same. I went straight for his neck and bit him harder than he thought I would, and faster. He yelped and yammered, and I ripped one ear and went for the other. He backed off. Beaton, the miller's wife, came shouting out of the house, and Avens ran for his kennel. Beaton went back indoors. I knew she had gone for a stick, but she did not really want to beat me. She was slow on her feet, and I had snuffed Fleabane's sweet puppy scent, nosed him all over to learn if he was well or ill, and licked his face clean before she came back out. Fleabane and I circled one another joyfully, tangling in his chain, drinking one another in through nose and tongue and ear and eye, together again for a few seconds. I ran off then and lay down under the hedge, close enough so I could see Fleabane, far enough so that Beaton would not have to chase me. Fleabane, being young and foolish, tugged at his chain and barked and tried to call me back. But his puppy days were over. He was a dog now. He was Will Cudweed's dog. Presently Lupus came striding down the path, looked where Fleabane was looking, saw me under the hedge, picked up a flint, and caught me on the backside as I turned to run. To run where? Back to him. Back to Lupus and Vetchen. Where else? When he got in that night, he fed me, and let me in to lie in Grindicob's empty stall. "That's a good hunting dog," he said to Vetchen, smiling. "Best in the village, I'd say." "Soon as she comes in season, we must breed her," Vetchen answered. "How much will her pups fetch, Lupus?" "Hard to say. That little runt my father took up to the mill is turning out no good." Why so? Lupus shrugged. My father's got no feel for dogs. Took the puppy out this evening and the dog wouldn't work. Didn't find nothing. The one time an old jackrabbit got up under the dog's nose. Dog took it and ate it. Vetchin laughed. You can laugh. Dad beat the puppy black and blue. He'll ruin the dog and then he'll take the bitch. Just when I've got her where I want her. He looked at me and spat into the fire. Tell him he can't, Lupus. He chose the puppy, we got the bitch. Think of the meat she'll bring us. And her pups should be ours to sell. Do you sit there, Vetchin, and tell me how to speak to my own father? Vetchin moved back a little from the fire. I inched away from both of them, but the door to the yard was shut. Lupus sat up in his chair. A prickle of fear seeped out from under Vetchin's dress. Both had been drinking, and the strong, sour smell of beer hung in the air before their faces. They were young, hardly out of childhood. Lupus, being the miller's son, was used to getting what he wanted. The whole village knew him for a bully. According to Comfort, Lupus wanted Vetchin one summer evening, so he told his father, and his father got her for him. Vetchin was very pretty, Comfort said. She thought her looks would buy her anything she wanted. Marriage with Lupus must have taught her otherwise, but she did not give in without a fight. Folk won't heed you, Lupus, if you let him trample on you. He treats you like a child. Lupus jumped up and knocked her flying. Her face reddened where his fist landed. Her eyes filled up and overflowed with angry tears. I saw her eye the knife that lay on the table, but she dared not put her hand out for it. Lupus saw where she was looking, knocked the knife away and raised his fist again. Vetchin backed off, shaking her head. I huddled at the back of Grindacob's empty stall. Later, when Lupus had gone to the alehouse, Vetchin found me there. She was crying, and I pushed my nose against her hand to comfort her, but she was full of anger and saw only the dog that had caused her a beating, and not the dog who might have been her friend. Your fault, stupid old bitch, she snapped. Your fault he hit me. I'll make him sorry later, but I'll make you sorry now. She did to me what Lupus had done to her, cuffing and cursing, hitting and kicking before hauling me outside. I could have bitten her. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. Chapter 11. Next morning, Filbert's barking woke me from my sleep before dawn. Vetchin, in her anger, had not tied me up properly, and I was soon away down to the great house. The yard was dark, apart from flickering torches. Soldiers stood beside the open stable door. Red light glowed on the dirty straw. Long shadows streaked the wall as a young soldier bent to strike the prisoner's chains from iron rings that fixed them to the walls. The priest stood by. I crept up close, keeping out of the torchlight. "Where are you taking us?" It was Rufus's voice. I almost ran to him. "How should I know?" the soldier answered. "Orders was move. They don't tell us lot where." The priest's bitch saw me then, or smelt me, and growled. I moved back out of the yard and watched from behind the boundary fence. Rufus, Comfort, and the widow of the man who died were roped together in a line, Rufus in front, next the widow, Comfort at the back. The widow cried quietly. 3 of the soldiers walked in front, one of them holding the rope. The young lad brought up the rear. The priest wished them Godspeed, kicked his bitch, and turned back to the great house. I trotted along behind the prisoners. The soldiers talked to one another, angry at their early start. "Why must we stumble down these filthy roads by night?" "'Cause we was told to, fathead. Anyway, it's not night, it's morning."
Well, it don't feel like mourning. And why was we told? Why don't they see to these rogues here at the manor court? They could have hanged him 5 months since. These folk aren't common rogues. What do you know? You know no more than they do. I know what I hear. I know there is rebellion in the country. There is men marching on the towns and houses fired and heads on poles. King Richard's judges themselves are done to death by common men. And what has that to do with these poor fools? They took messages and passed them on. They was in league with the rebels. Now they're wanted at King Richard's court to show the common people what becomes of those who side with wicked folk.
The young lad at the back had been listening to the others. Now he spoke up.
These are good people. My Cecily's mother knows them. Shut your mouth, young John, else your head may end on a pole and all. And then what will sweet Cecily say?
The older men laughed, and the lad kept silent after that. The road was dry and dusty. The prisoners trudged, roped in a row, tripping and stumbling in the dark, until the sun came up. The soldiers trudged beside them, drinking now and then from an ale-skin which they passed between them. They did not offer any to the prisoners. Towards midday, we came up to a miserable hut, leaning against a fir tree by the side of the road. The soldiers kicked the door open, turfed out a sickly child, and pushed the prisoners inside. They went in too, and shut the door behind them. The child wailed, but quietly, then pulled his rags round him, leaned his back against the tree, and waited. I suppose the soldiers ate whatever food they found inside the hut. I ate a hen that we caught out in the long grass at the back of it. That was the first hen I ever ate, though not the last. I do not think Rufus, Comfort, or the widow ate at all. They did not look refreshed when they came out of the hut. The soldiers let each of them suck once, briefly, at the ale-sack. I was used to running fast, for a short while, and then resting. The soldiers were slow on the road, but they did not stop to rest. I drank from streams when we crossed them, and took a rabbit late in the afternoon, so I did not suffer thirst or hunger. But my pads were sore by midday, and by evening they were bleeding. When we stopped for the night in a wood, the soldiers did not untie their prisoners, although they were in a bad state, weakened by heat and thirst and hunger. Comfort's face was thin and dirty. Her hair had come loose from under her hood and hung across her face, and both her feet were bleeding. But her chief sorrow was Rufus. He was too old for such a march.
"Can we not bring our good horse, Marlene, so that he can ride?" she begged. "He is a great house horse, but they let us use him sometimes. You could send the lad back for him." "Only thing your man will ride will be the gallows tree," the soldier told her. "And he can do that now if he's too weak to walk."
The soldier sent the lad off to pick up wood and got a fire going. They had not much food with them. Most of what they had they ate themselves, giving only dry bread to their prisoners and a little ale. Rufus did not want to eat, but Comfort made him. The widow would not, though both of them tried to make her. "Why should I eat? I'm sick of all this wretched business, pulled along like a beast on a rope. God knows what waits for us, and God knows why, maybe, but I do not. My man is dead, and I shall soon be. Why should I eat? You eat their pestilential bread, Comfort, if you can, or give it to your Rufus. I want none of it." The fire dwindled. The prisoners lay humped and huddled to one side of it, and the soldiers to the other, with only John, the young lad, left on guard. He seemed to get all the worst jobs. The longest watch, the shortest rest, the least ale, the heaviest load. I licked my paws, and thought about the hen I'd eaten at midday, and the rabbit, and wished for another of each. Chapter 12. The moon had set, and it was dark when Oxer and his people came upon us. I may have nodded off myself. The first I knew, Oxer was letting go a stream of rudeness about village dogs who wandered uninvited into other dogs' woods and slept when they ought to have stayed awake, and so on. He has a big bark for a small dog. There were men and women with him, all armed, else he would not have been so brave. His people killed 2 of the soldiers instantly with 1 arrow each. The second man choked out loud as he fell and woke the other 2. The oldest of them threw down his pike and ran, but I do not think he got far. John, the young lad, was slow with sleep. He stumbled up, grabbed his pike, and stood beside the fire, a perfect target for the 12 arrows pointed at him from beyond the firelight. Rufus sat up and rubbed his eyes. He took in the soldier slumped beside him with an arrow in his throat. He saw the other lying on his face. He saw young John sweating, white-eyed with fear. Rufus could not stand up because of being roped to Comfort and the widow, but he knelt up and called out, "No need to kill the lad. He'll not give you any trouble." Somebody stepped into the light and grabbed the young boy's weapon. I saw that it was Orderic, who came from the village next to ours. We had heard he was taken by soldiers back in the spring, before Rufus and Comfort were arrested. Now here he stood, a free man in the wood. Rufus and Comfort were overjoyed to see him. Orderic untied the prisoners. "No offence, lad," he told young John as he retied the rope around the boy's wrists and gave the end of it to Rufus. "Times change, my son. Times change, and we must change along with them. I hope you'll be a better prisoner than you were a guard." Rufus smiled and took the rope. Then he saw me. "Comfort!" he shouted. "Look!" He dropped onto his knees and took my head in his hands and exclaimed angrily at the scars round my jaws and ran his hands over me to see what other damage he might find. He sighed and shook his head at my sore paws and told me I was a good dog, the best, the very best. Comfort, meanwhile, was patting me and thanking me for bringing Alice's hat to her and asking me where I had sprung from and telling Rufus that if only I could talk, I might tell her where the children were. When both had greeted me properly, Comfort helped the widow up. Orderic stamped out the fire, and on we went, leaving the dead men behind us. Oxer made a meal, as small dogs do, of telling me who was boss. When we reached his camp, I saw it was not him, in spite of what he said. A huge old dog, his thick black coat tangled over his deep dark eyes, rose, shook himself, and growled a warning. "Down, Serlo," Orderic told him. "These are friends. Be civil." I crouched down well outside the circle of the camp to wait and see if Serlo agreed, and what he might do if he did not. Comfort went with the widow and another woman down to where a stream flowed into a small pool, and I followed. They washed, and Comfort carried back a jug of water and bathed Rufus's face. Then they lay down together, side by side, with no rope biting at their wrists, and slept. I sat at their feet, watching them. Serlo got up slowly and stiff-legged over to me like a bear. His plumed tail curved up over his back, and he carried his ears a little forward, to remind me that behind his lazy boss-dog style lay bite and bone and muscle. I set my ears back politely, dropped my tail, and lowered my body towards the ground. Serlo sniffed me and sat down beside me for a while. Oxer yipped and yapped around us, and then went off as though he had important things to do. I lay down presently and stretched myself at Rufus's back. Oxer settled close to the fire with one eye on me. Serlo sat by Orderic, listening to the talk. The last thing I saw as I closed my eyes in sleep was his dark eyes on me, and his great head, tousled and black against the fire, aglow, and Orderic's hand scratching behind his ear. We stayed in the forest for days and nights. I felt at home there because I was with Rufus. He and Comfort and Orderic and the others were waiting for news of what was happening in the outside world. They talked much, and young John listened. Orderic talked the most. "John Ball, who leads the rebels, tells us that we should pay no taxes to the priest, unless payer be richer than the priest," he said. "And he a priest himself?"
wondered Rufus. "What says the church to that?" "Church turned him out of doors," Audric answered. "He teaches in the fields now. He's a true friend to poor folk. They say he's called these 20 years or more for an end to serfdom, and paid for it in prison many a time." For myself, I did not care which side was which, nor what King Richard might do about it. My place was with Rufus. But I was fretting badly for Fleabane. He was in danger while he was Will Cudweed's dog. I hunted every day in Rufus's company. He shot squirrels and rabbits and any number of wood pigeons, with a bow and arrows Audric lent him. It was good, so good, to hear his praise and see his smile and feel his hand gentle but hard on my back, stroking, praising, thanking. When Rufus did not want me with him, I ran free under the bracken and drank from forest pools, and afterwards slept in the sun, and trotted back to camp, to the smell of wood smoke, and the sweet taste of the scraps, and Serlo's great figure black against the firelight. If I could have known that Fleabane was safe, I would have been completely happy. One evening, just on sunset, a man stumbled into the camp with one of Audric's men on either side of him, holding him up. They had found him lying in a ditch, half dead of a sword gash that curved around his shoulder and halfway down his back, letting his strength out in a slow red ooze. There was no point in washing him or binding up his wound, but Comfort gave him ale to drink, as much as he could, to cure his thirst and ease his pain. His name was Ralph Sturdy, and he had been with a great crowd of rebels who had marched on the town of Maidstone, and from there to a place called London. "We captured Edward de Cram, who was the richest man in town, lord of a great house, master of many men, and we cut off his head," Ralph Sturdy said. "And he died like any ordinary man. I tell you, his blood looked the same as mine. It's only riches makes him different. Why should we sweat to buy their ease? Not that he'll make any man sweat now, nor woman neither, not without his head. We set it on the town gate, where he'll get a fine view of all that he no longer owns." "Then what, Ralph Sturdy?" Rufus asked. "We made Wat Tyler of Maidstone our leader, and we took John Ball out of prison, who was put there for saying we should all be free. And on we went, with folk running out to join us at every poor village, and from every little dwelling on the way, up to Blackheath, that stands outside of London town. Oh, it was great days. We thought the world was turning. We thought it was the end of hard times, and the start of every new thing. Maybe it is. I'll never know." Comfort gave the man more ale. His face was turning yellow, breathing was hard for him, and his hands shook. But he would tell his tale. "John Ball stood up on Blackheath and spoke to all the people. When Adam dug and Eve span, who was then a gentleman? That's what he asked us. We shouted and threw our hats in the air. Then we went on into the town. All the folk from Essex had arrived by then on the far side of the river, and the gates of the city were opened to us, by which we knew that there were rebels within as well as without, and we were glad. Young King Richard and his ministers fled to the Tower of London. Seemed like the town was ours. And if the town, why then the country too." "What must that feel like?" Rufus asked. "What must that feel like?" His hands shook as he smoothed my ears. "What did you then?" Comfort asked. She held ale to Ralph Sturdy's mouth and wrapped some deer hides round him. He was starting to shiver. "Why, then we killed. We fired fine houses, and we danced outside in the street while they burned. And those who ran out we killed, both rich and poor. Some fought, but not many." He closed his eyes. "Why? Why kill the poor folk?" Comfort asked, spilling half the ale. Rufus shook his head. I do not know. I only know we did it. Mind, we killed lords and priors too, and set their heads on poles and carried them through the streets, and all the foreign scum that we could find, every dirty Flemish weaver, we killed also." He was quiet for a little while, then struggled to sit up. Comfort had taken her arm from round his shoulders. He leaned up on one elbow for a moment, then fell back onto the ground. "And their wives," he whispered, turning his face away. "And their children." "Why?" Comfort bent down to shout into his face. "Why the children? Who made you do that?" "Some of the men said that the weavers take the bread out of our children's mouths, and so will their children too if they're let to grow big enough. They take the work that should be ours. They're wicked, dirty heathens. Some of the men said that." "Fool!" Comfort spat. "Murdering idiot!" Ralph Sturdy shut his eyes. "And was the king still in the tower?" asked Rufus presently. Ralph Sturdy shook his head. "The king came out to some of the people then and promised that there would be an end to poor folk being serfs. But we didn't hear that then, not our lot. Perhaps if we had, the archbishop would still have a head on his shoulders. Next day, Wat Tyler went to meet the king. He met him, but he met his death besides." "Wat Tyler? Dead? Who killed him?" "The king's men. They drove us from the town. That's when I got my wound. They hanged John Ball, but the rest of us are spared. All spared. The king has sworn it. And we are all free men. There shall be no more serfs. The killing has brought us our freedom." "Too late for you," Comfort said. The men had speared a boar that day. Normally they would have smoked most of the meat to save for later, but because of the news Ralph Sturdy brought, they jointed the whole carcass then and there, cooked, carved, sat by the fire and feasted. Rufus fed choice scraps to me. Oxer gnawed on the ears, and Audric gave Serlo a whole thigh bone to himself. When all the meat was gone, one of the lads took out a flute. Soon there was singing and dancing round the fire. John, the young soldier, stood up to dance with the rest. Firelight flickered on brown cheeks, and the worn cloth of the women's skirts brushed against the grass and bracken, stirring up a sweet, damp scent. The piping of the flute in the still forest sounded small and a little lonely. The flute played on while the fire sank, and the moon rose, and the young people, and the not-so-young also, stumbled out into the dark ring of the night to lie together in the tall green bracken. Rufus watched it all, his hand curled round my neck. "Think of it, sweet Comfort," he said quietly. "Our Wat and Will and Alice shall have no bailiff stand behind them with a whip in his hand. There'll be no Harriet to pay when I pass on, no merchant to find when Alice or the boys get wed. All that we plant and grow and harvest, all that you weave and brew and bake will be for us and ours. Can it be true, do you think?" "It must be, Rufus, if the king says so," she replied. I did not believe it, but I am only a dog. Comfort sighed. "I cannot see why the weavers should have had to die, Rufus, nor their wives, nor their children." Rufus nodded. "They should not have Comfort. That was wrong." Ralph Sturdy shook and shook, spoke once or twice of somebody called Eleanor, and died just as the sun was rising.
Chapter 13. We dogs went off alone to hunt in the morning before the men and women woke. Oxer bounced along in front of us, jumping to see over the bracken. I came next. Serlo ambled off to one side of us on his great, heavy paws. Once we had left the 100 smells of camp behind us and the trees were all round us, we started to tease out the forest scents. Pine needles, soft green leaves, wood pigeon, squirrel everywhere, hedge pig, musky fox. Once down among some rocks we smelt brown bear and ran. Serlo found what we were after first, a doe and her fawn. Then the doe's smell faded where she had gone off to graze, and we were left with just the smell of fawn, sweet and strong and growing stronger. We took the creature easily. With Serlo we could have had the mother too if we had wanted her, but the young one was plenty for us, so we left the mother. We ate and cleaned ourselves and slept. I dreamt of the byre and the muzzle, but woke to the green and brown of the forest, good company, and freedom. I knew at once when I woke that I must go to Fleabane. I thought that Serlo would go back to Orderic at the camp, but instead he followed me and Oxer followed him, out of the forest and down into the farmlands, and it was 3 of us, not 1, who laid up under Will Cudweed's hedge, waiting for nightfall. Fleabane knew we were there. I heard him whining from inside his broken barrel, but he didn't bark. After a while, Will Cudweed tramped across the yard and kicked the barrel as he passed to quiet Fleabane. One of his daughters came out with a jug in her hand to fetch ale. Another chased a chicken round the barn, caught it, wrung its neck, and sat down on a bale of straw to pluck it. Indoors, Beaton raised her voice at a servant. Light slipped away. Night smells sharpened. Dew and smoke, blood and feathers from the plucked hen. And Fleabane, sweet Fleabane in his barrel. Avens must have done something to annoy someone in the house, because the door flew open and he came yelping out. He smelt us and barked, but he did not come to us. Serlo is a big dog, and Avens knew it without seeing him. At last the house was quiet. Hens clucked occasionally in the barn, goats bleated. Up in the woods night creatures called. Cold crept out of the grass. We lay and licked our paws. When all was safe, I crept out from under the hedge and ran down to the yard. Fleabane was curled in the back of his barrel. He had no straw to lie on and was shivering. I could smell pain and fear on him as soon as I put my nose round the mouth of the barrel. His 2 eyes shone at me out of his small face, and his sharp little ears came forwards, and his tail thumped softly on the floor. I pressed my nose against him. I lay down beside him, and he began to whimper. I washed him steadily from top to toe. That always soothed him best when he was tiny. It did so still. One of his ears was caked with blood. He did not flinch, but let me work at it till it was clean. One of his forepaws smelt bad. I nosed it gently and found it hot and swollen. Something sharp was bedded under the skin of his pad. A thorn. I drew it with my teeth. His neck was chafed, and there were the marks of a stick on his back. If Will Cudweed or Lupus or Vetchen had come out to us then, I would have torn their throats out. But they did not, and I worked on, soothing and cleaning, until Fleabane smelt more like himself, and was able to put his ears back and smile. I put my teeth to his collar then, and began to chew. I was 2 parts through it when the back door of Will Cudweed's house opened, and 2 of his boys stumbled out to pee in the yard. They had a little competition to see who could pee highest up the side of the barn. When they had finished, one of them wandered over to the barrel, picked up a stick, and without bending down to look inside, poked it into the barrel and rattled it round. Fleabane jumped up and rushed out, barking. The boy laughed and clipped him with a stick. I jumped up then, ran out and bit the boy, not as hard as I'd intended, but quite sharp on the leg. He dropped his stick and hopped about hollering, while his brother began trying to catch me without getting bitten by hooking a stick through my collar. He had just managed it and had my head pinned to the ground, while Fleabane went mad at the end of his chain, when Serlo stepped into the yard. Now Serlo was a big dog. He was heavy, too, big-boned and tall at the shoulder, with a great broad forehead and deep-set eyes. His pelt was thick and black and matted, turning to rust here and there where the sun had sucked the colour out. He'd been born out in the forest and lived there all his life. He was his own dog before he was Orderic's dog. He was Orderic's dog because he chose to be. He could have lived alone without people. There came a time in his life when he did. When Thurlow stepped into Will Cudweed's yard and growled at Will Cudweed's son, who had me pinned to the ground with a stick and was hollering for his father, that boy knew that he was looking at no ordinary dog. Instead he saw, there in his father's muddy yard, a ghost beast out of the deep heart of the woods. The stick fell from his hand, his face turned yellow, and although I could not see it, I have no doubt that his greasy hair rose on his head. He dared not turn and run. He stood stock still, with his brother, who had stopped hollering and begun to cry, behind him. Thurlow, who could have killed both boys with no trouble, merely looked at them and rumbled. He stood between the boys and Fleabane's barrel, while I chewed through the last part of Fleabane's collar. The chain fell into the mud, and we were away back to the hedge where Oxer was standing lookout. We were off to the forest before Will Cudweed could stumble out into his own yard and beat one of his boys for losing his new puppy, and the other for telling lies about devil dogs from out of the wildwood. Chapter 14. When we got back to camp, Rufus and Comfort were happy to see Fleabane, though Rufus shook his head at his rough coat, and Comfort exclaimed angrily at the marks on his back. It was late afternoon, and everyone was busy. Most folks were going home, because of the royal pardon that Ralph Sturdy had spoken of. Comfort was desperate to go home too, but Rufus would not agree to returning straight away. "How do we know the man was right?" he asked. "It may be that some are pardoned and some are not. Even if all are pardoned, they will lock us up again if the king's word has not reached them yet." Comfort knew that he was right. Orderic, too, and a few others had their doubts, and decided to stay hidden a while longer. "I will wait if I must," Comfort announced. "But only if we move closer to the village, Rufus, so that we get sight of the children. Even the old dog has her pup with her now, and I must be with mine." In the end they agreed to leave the forest and make camp on a piece of high ground that lay between our village and Orderic's. He knew where we could hide, if we were careful. There are things dogs can see and hear and smell that people cannot, and this is often true in places where bad things have happened. I knew, as soon as we approached the ruins, that they were such a place. I whined and hung back, and Fleabane was troubled too, but Rufus took no notice. "Old dog doesn't like this place," Comfort said. "Perhaps she knows something we do not." "What she knows need not worry us. I doubt she has the second sight," Rufus replied. "Maybe she smells the autumn coming. Summer's almost gone." The ruin was a round stone tower ground down to a stump by years of frost and sun. There was no roof but the sky, so they built a shelter out of skins and branches. They lit only small fires by night, keeping the stone blocks of the tower wall between the fire and the valley. Orderic and another went off most mornings to hunt. They would steal nothing from the villagers. No solitary goat, no sheep, not even any firewood. They returned each day to the forest, taking their bows and arrows. Thurlow and Oxer went with them. They brought back pigeons, partridges, thrushes, or blackbirds, sometimes rooks, occasionally a deer, more often rabbits, and if all else had failed, a sackful of squirrels, or fish and eels. Orderic brought other things besides that did not smell like food to me: wild garlic and sweet chestnuts,
hazelnuts and blackberries, crab apples, mushrooms, and honey. Fleabane and I stayed with Rufus. He and Comfort went out each morning to fetch firewood. They picked up acorns, too, as they began to ripen, to grind for bread and porridge. Also green leaves, such as people love to eat, and blackberries. Each evening they crept out to stare down at the village. On the second night they saw 2 tiny figures tumbling out of old Edie's door. What I seemed to see by night in that place puzzled me. Some nights there were small figures moving round the tower. Rufus and Comfort never seemed to see them, but I watched them come and go, passing right through the blocks of heavy stone. Whenever I saw them, the shape of the hillside looked different. Earth was mounded high into a double dyke all round the top, and the stone ruin was taller and newer than it was by day. I am used to scenting things before I hear them, and hearing them before I see them. Sight is the least of my powers, though mine is good. I did smell these night people, but faintly, like an old scent left long ago. I heard them too, but from a great way off. All of us dogs could see them. Serlo called them shadow people. He said they did no harm. The faint trace of scent they left was meat and dirt and uncured hides. They had 3 dogs, long-boned and hairy, who did not seem to know that I was watching them. There were goats and children and a baby, smaller than Alice, who clung close to her mother, wrapped inside the pelt her mother wore. They carried spears and small bows. On the night of the first frost of winter, when the stars were dusting the black sky, I watched the shadow people flickering round the hilltop. They had slaughtered a goat, and were eating round the pale flames of their fire, which gave out not one breath of warmth. I usually saw them only at twilight. Once the sun was down and the moon high, they would vanish. This night they did not vanish. They ate up their goat. 2 men skinned a hare, and a woman watched them. A girl sat staring at the flames, her little brother dozing on her lap, thumb slipping from his mouth. An old hill dog nursed puppies. I began to feel prickling and tingling in my bones. Fleabane whined and shivered. Gradually we found ourselves among a crowd of shadow people, all moving slowly up the hill, silent, crouching, hidden from those above, sticks and spears and knives clutched tight. The hilltop dogs cannot have been much good. The newcomers took the hilltop people by surprise and killed them all. Them and their dogs. Even the small boy on his sister's lap. Even the sister. The old bitch and her puppies, the goats, bleating and running. I watched. I heard their cries faint and far. I smelt their old, forgotten blood. I listened to the victors hollering. Then the moon came out sharp and clear. The shadow people vanished, and I saw a sight stranger than all. Rufus, my Rufus, standing in air, his feet high above the ground. I did not know what I was seeing then. Chapter 15. A few days later, the camp on the hill broke up. Serlo went back to the wildwood. Audric, Oxa, and the others went back to their village. Rufus, Comfort, Fleabane, and I crept down to Edie's house on the edge of ours. Rufus cursed and said it was not safe, but Comfort cursed louder and said it was now so long since she had held her children, and that she could wait no longer, but would go alone if Rufus would not come. We waited until after dark. Then Comfort tapped at Edie's door and called her name. Edie hobbled out, opened the door a crack, stuck her thin nose out, and fell into Comfort's arms. Wat and Will clung to their mother like 2 little ticks, but Alice cried and hid her face against Edie's chest. She had forgotten Comfort and her father. She had forgotten me. When I tried to lick her cheek, she screamed. Edie said that news of the king's pardon had come to the village 10 days since. "We could have come down earlier," Comfort scolded Rufus, "if you had not been so afraid." Now that she held her children safely in her arms, she turned her fear loose against him. "The priest gave it out in church last Sunday," Edie said. "A royal pardon for all sinners who played a part in the wicked rebellion against our blessed King Richard. Told us we must beg God for forgiveness if we had helped or harboured any sinful rebels, and thank him for the king's great mercy. Told us God would sit in judgment over rebels, said they will surely suffer great misery when the horrible pit of hell opens up. Numbers of devils, he said, would appear to drag them to the torture and burning of hellfire." Edie's voice shook. Rufus sighed and said nothing. "Well then," Comfort said quietly, "there's an end to it." She sat facing Edie's small fire with Alice, who had decided her mother was not after all to be feared, leaning back in her lap. Wat and Will sat at her feet, one small back resting against each of her knees. One hand held Alice, the other reached and stroked, right and left, the tangled, matted hair of her two sons. I pushed my nose into Rufus's hand and whined. Rufus was safety to me, and food and justice and all good things. I wanted to comfort him, but I could not. "You must stay here with me," Edie said to Rufus. "Will Cudweed has given your house to his son Lupus. He says you owe him money." "Then I will go to the great house," Rufus said, "and ask for it back, for I owe him nothing." Edie sighed. "Great house will listen to what Miller Cudweed says. They'll not take your word against his. He says if the debt is not paid by Michaelmas, your house will be forfeit for good. He was sure you'd not come back. He said you would have been hanged in London town if there was any justice in the land." "What did Will Cudweed ever know of justice?" Rufus asked bitterly. Edie shook her head. "I told him the king gave us a promise along with his royal pardon, promising an end to serfdom, Rufus. He laughed at me. 'When pigs fly,' he said, 'a serf's a serf and ever shall be, same as I'm a miller.' That's what he said, Rufus." There was little enough food in Edie's house, and no money to buy more. Half a crock of flour, the end of a sack of dried peas, 6 hens, but no pig, and no planting till spring, and precious little harvest before summer. What could Rufus do but take me off into the woods to steal once more from the same king who had forgiven him? Fleabane had already taken himself off to visit Swart's farm, where he hoped for richer pickings. I let him go. He has grown up and feeds himself. He was a fine puppy. He's a fine dog now. I'm proud of him. It was a cruel winter, but we lived through it. Edie did not. She must have given her own share of food to keep the children fed. She was bone thin when we came back, a bundle of twigs held together round the middle with twine. Deep in under her wiry eyebrows, her old eyes shone with fever, and her hands shook constantly. The first blast of the east wind carried her off. Rufus took what few things she left in her house because she had no kin, and the priest buried her in exchange for them. Comfort wanted a mass sung for her, remembering how the old woman had feared the priest's talk of hellfire, but there was not the money to pay for it. When February was gone, and March rain had fed the green growth everywhere, and April promised joy and new life as it does each year, we breathed deep of the soft air, and went to the fields happy every sunrise. Comfort patted her belly and smiled at Rufus. She had given up hope of getting her own home back, and set about improving Edie's. 3 days out of every 7 all the summer, Rufus and Comfort worked on Great House land, just as they had before the rebellion. The bailiff checked their work and criticised and complained, just as he always had done. The lord of the Great House taxed and fined any he could, just as he always had. And the priest damned those few who still dared to complain. Nothing had changed. But Rufus held fast to the royal pardon. "The royal pardon stands,"
he would murmur, ashamed, because he and men like him had not, after all, changed the world. King Richard lets us live, who could have taken all our lives. Chapter 16. It was the end of summer when the king began to take them. Men came to our door by night, as they had done before. John of Starvale is taken. Thomas Kemp too. Ranulph Burgate and his wife Alyssum are in the lockup. Orderic is a prisoner again. Soldiers took him. It is a plague of lockups and jail, Rufus muttered. We will go to the wildwood, Comfort, where life is clean and green. We will take Wat and Will and little Alice. We will take the old dog, although she's not so spry as once she was when it comes to hunting the king's deer, which is what it will come to. Comfort nodded. When shall we go, Rufus? After the harvest time? Now, Comfort, now. Put 2 hens in a basket. Fetch the goat indoors. Put up what flour and cheese we have. We'll go tonight, as soon as nightfall covers us. A hard rain falls when the king begins to break his word. That evening, as the sun set, Comfort tied the hen basket to Rufus's back. He tied Alice to hers. I nipped the goat to show her we meant business. Wat and Will carried each a small sack, one of oats, one of beans. Both boys were full of wonder that we should be setting out for the wildwood as the sun set, instead of sitting down to supper. And then we heard them at our door. We heard their boots and the shafts of their pikes on the hard summer earth outside. We heard the soft chink of the sergeant's mailcoat. We heard cursing and laughing. The door crashed down, and the soldiers strode over it, their hard boots splintering the wood. The sergeant spat on Comfort's clean hearth and swept from the table the ale and cheeses she had ready. They took the lot of us, Alice tied to her mother's back, Wat and Will holding tight to her skirt, the hens in the basket, me padding at Rufus's heel trying to dodge the soldiers' hard boots and their harder pikes. The goat ran off. I was glad Fleabane was not with us. Nobody else was taken from our village. The priest turned out to see us go, along with his miserable bitch snapping and snivelling behind him, and Will Cudweed with Avens and Beaton weeping behind them. Rufus and Comfort's neighbour Joan may have watched, but she dared not show her face. It was a long march to Maidstone, where they took us. It was hot, and there was nobody left in the forest to help us this time. Rufus took Wat and Will by turns on his back, but if the soldiers had not taken pity and carried the boys also, they would have been left behind on the dusty road. Comfort struggled on. Alice joggled on her back, blinking her eyes from the dust our feet stirred up. We walked each day from sunrise to midday, rested until the sun was halfway down the sky, then walked again till dark. At every village we would stop, and some poor family would find their door knocked down, and their man swept up to join our wretched little crowd. By the time we got to Maidstone, there were 12 prisoners, all men. Comfort was the only woman, and hers the only children. The prison at Maidstone was a stinking place, dirtier than any byre or barn. As we came close to it, we passed right through the market. People stopped their business to watch. Some frowned and turned away. Some pelted us. Dogs ran barking after us, snapping at our heels. I turned to fight the worst of them, a rude brute twice my size but mangy, and sank several good gashes in his neck and shoulders. Then we were in the prison, all in one dark room, deep underground. There were 50, 60 prisoners altogether. Most of them were not rebels and were glad, it seemed, to find people to look down on, people they could think worse of than themselves. Comfort and Rufus prayed, and so did many of the others who had travelled with us. When he had finished praying, Rufus hobbled over to the guard. "My wife, Comfort," he said, "is with child.
You cannot hang her. Later that evening they brought in a midwife who looked at Comfort, felt her stomach, and agreed that she was. What will they do with me? Comfort asked. The law says they may keep you until the child is born and hang you then, the midwife said. But they may also let you go. I will go to the judge now and tell him you are pregnant. I will tell him also that you have 3 small children and nobody to care for them but yourself. If that does not help, will you keep the children for me? Comfort asked. The midwife shook her head. Some poor woman begs that of me every week. I cannot. But I will see them safe, I promise you. The priory will take your daughter and the monastery will take your boys. I will not leave them here, I promise you. Take them early if they have to go, Comfort said. Church takes all, in the end. I will come in the morning. Comfort and Rufus spoke quietly, and lay down together with their children between them in the dirty straw. I lay at their feet. All through the night Comfort and Rufus prayed and talked and wept. They had only just begun to sleep when the midwife returned. They've taken pity on you, so they say, she told Comfort. More likely they fear the crowd might turn against them if they keep you and hang you later. They do not want the people's pity stirred up for you rebels. They'll tell the crowd they're letting you go free because you have 3 children. It'll make them seem merciful. Rufus? He must hang. When do they come for us? They come now. The iron grille was opened. Our little crowd were pulled out, and it shut behind us. We were hurried up the stone stairway and out into the courtyard. The judge clattered in on a horse, slid off and sat down at a table servants had set up. He was dressed in fine red robes. The trial did not take long. Somebody read a proclamation. The bishop blessed the proceedings and thanked God for the defeat of wickedness. Comfort's chains were struck off her ankles, and the others were led out into the market square. Comfort had time only to touch Rufus's hand as he was led away. She could not see nor speak for tears, but she did not cry out. The scaffold was already set up in the square. The crowd gathered below. The midwife fought her way through the people and took the children from Comfort, so that they should not see their father die. She tried to take Comfort away too, but Comfort would not go. She stood still in the crowd until it was over. I held close to Comfort, pushing my nose into her hand, pressing my warmth against her legs, telling her I was there. She did not notice me. She watched Rufus with a look so intent, so tightly drawn, that you might have walked down the beam of her gaze. Rufus looked back at her until the last. His lips were moving, but we could not hear what he said. Comfort knew, though, without hearing. When Adam dug and Eve span, who was then a gentleman? She said it with him quietly. He died very quickly, being an old man and tired. Afterwards the midwife came back for us. She fed us and cared for us until Comfort was ready for the long walk home. She found time for my sorrow, too. She would lay her hand on my head and smile at me and call me Comfort's good and faithful friend. Chapter 17. I could not bear home without Rufus. Once I had seen Comfort safely in at Edie's door with the boys and Alice by her, I turned and ran. I did not know where I wanted to be, only that I could not be indoors with Rufus gone.
I ran out across the great field and up over the hill to where Fleabane and I had made a den so long ago. I crept in under the rock and nosed the patch of ash where Fleabane used to sleep. A faint trace of him hung there, and I laid my face down on the ash and closed my eyes and dreamed. I dreamed of when I was a puppy, and Rufus would carry me tucked into a fold of cloth above his belt. He used to feed me bread and milk when I was little, sometimes even an egg. Comfort used to scold him, but he always laughed. He knew she didn't mean it. I dreamt of hunting, and the joy of finding the first hint of game, and the excitement of following a trail with Rufus behind me, watching my ears and tail to see what I was after. He used to praise me for waiting till he had his arrow ready, and gentle me when I brought him the game. On a good hunt, we were two halves of the same beast. I dreamt of how the house felt before the troubles came, when Alice was a baby, when Rufus was old already, but content, and Comfort loved him, and they slept together on a pallet stuffed with heather, and I at their feet and Alice beside us. I'd wake at night and pad across the earth floor to her cradle and look down at her to be sure that she was safe. Sometimes Rufus would wake and see me there and smile. He would cuff the boys, but gently if they pulled my tail or hurt my ears, and tell them they must treat me well, or else I'd never teach them how to hunt. He would set Alice on my back, and Comfort would shake her head at him, and he would boast I was the gentlest dog in Christendom. And he the gentlest master. I woke alone and sorrowful, and scraped out from under the rock, and sat up on top of it with the cold stone sharp against my pads. The world felt large and empty. Neither the sky above, nor the river, loud in the valley below, nor the wide, high dark above, offered any trace of Rufus. He was gone. I put my head back and shut my eyes, and howled my want up to the black night. I had seen him, standing on air among the shadow people. I had seen him tread the air again in Maidstone marketplace upon the scaffold. I knew that I would not see him again. I got down from the rock and said goodbye to Fleabane's puppy scent inside the den, and turned my back on the valley and the village, on fire and bed and bone, on love and comfort and belonging. I took myself off into the wood, where the wild things and the outcasts dwell, where the trees gleam and rustle for mile upon green mile, with a sound like water, and leaves hide wolf and bear and boar. I crisscrossed glades and snuffed my way over banks and down ditches, stopped to drink at streams, and took myself a fat red squirrel to be going on with, but by dusk I'd had no scent of pig, which only made me want one all the more. I crept in under the roots of a tree that lay rotting across one corner of the clearing that its fall had left. There was a hollow underneath, lined with dead leaves and roofed with a tangled mat of roots, the mouth obscured with overhanging brambles. A hidden place, a safe place, a place a dog like me might call home for a night or two. I tucked my nose in under my tail and slept. Deep in the dark of night, two kinds of footsteps woke me. One kind loud, stumbling close at hand, the other faint and stealthy. One kind hunting, and the other not yet knowing it was hunted. I crept on my belly to the edge of my den and put my nose out under the arching bramble. A bad smell dirtied the night air. It was the smell of desolation. It was the smell of the ragman. He limped into the clearing, staff in hand, bell silenced with a dirty rag. He stopped and listened, shook his head, and lowered himself slowly down onto a mossy tree stump. It seemed to me, from the way he kept listening, that perhaps he didn't know he was being hunted, though as yet he could not hear the footsteps drawing closer. He was thinner than when I'd last seen him, down at the mill taking Will Cudweed's blood money. He pulled a piece of old salt fish out of his pouch and chewed on it. It was obvious, watching him, that he needed rest badly, but dared not take much. I think even his dull ears caught the sound of footsteps then. Someone was moving carefully through the wood, coming our way, slowing as they neared the clearing, coming on a little, stopping. Some small night animal grunted, and the ragman jumped and dropped his saltfish. He scraped round on the ground, searching, found it and chewed some more. Then he pulled a leather bottle from his pouch and drank deeply. The smell was sharp, like ale, but stronger. I dare say he died happy, because he was still drinking when the arrow pierced his throat. I stayed quite still and silent, under cover of the brambles, my belly flattened down into the leaf mould, and my ears pricked, listening. Whoever shot the arrow must be just behind me. When he stepped into the clearing, which was just a little lighter than the surrounding woods, I saw it was young John, the soldier who stood guard over Rufus and Comfort the first time they were taken, the lad Rufus told Orderic not to shoot after the ambush. He did not come close to the ragman, just close enough to see that he was dead, and he did not retrieve his arrow. "That's for you, Rufus," he said. "You were a good man, and he sold your life." Then he turned and went away through the wood. I eased out from under the brambles and trotted away too. I did not want to stay near the ragman, even though he was dead. By mid-morning I had found my wild pig. The scent hit me in a blast as I pushed my wet nose under a tuft of grass and straight into his lair. He wasn't there, or I would not have lived to hunt him. But he'd been there, and no more than a day and a night ago, I'd say. His salty tang filled my nose and made my mouth water. I followed his trail away under the trees and out across a stretch of open heathland, where I lost him and had to cast round in circles until I found where he had stopped to grub up bulbs. After that he went into an oak wood, where he feasted on acorns and slept, most likely, for the night. Early next morning he went down into some poor man's strip of field to plunder beans and barley. From there I lost him again, because he got into a stream, and instead of getting out on the far side, he must have walked down the middle for a little way. I tracked upstream and down, both banks, and picked him up again, his scent growing stronger all the time. I followed him back into deep woodland. I knew that I was near then, and I wondered for a moment what I was doing alone in the woods, hunting a creature that would likely kill me. But I snuffed up his powerful stench, and I remembered. This was to be my last, best hunt for Rufus, whose dog I was still, though he'd left me. I looked back over my shoulder, as though I might hear his gentle voice, or see him there, quiet, alert, his arrow at the ready. But all I saw were the grey boles of the trees, stretching back and back, and all I heard was the rustle of leaf on leaf on leaf. Rufus was gone. I put my head down and ran in. The boar had stuffed himself with beans and barley and was deep asleep and dreaming, else I would never have got near his throat before he'd cut mine open with his trotters or stuck me with his tusks. I could tell I'd got him by the windpipe, because he made very little noise. But he stood up and threw his head from side to side, and me with it, dangling and bouncing from his throat with my legs off the ground. One of his forefeet laid my side open. I did not feel the pain, but I could tell that one more strike like that would kill me. Rufus's face appeared behind my eyes. He shook his head. "You're a good old dog," he murmured, "a brave old dog. But you're a fool to try for a boar." My teeth were locked around the boar's windpipe. I knew he could not breathe, or not enough to stay alive, so long as I kept my jaws clamped onto him. And I knew that he would kill me with his sharp front trotters before I strangled him. My two strong jaws were every part of me. He shook me like a puppy, but I would not open. Then he grunted and leaned forward, clever, pressing down on me with all his bristling weight. I felt one of my ribs go, and the air rushing out of my lungs and a shrill noise in my head, and I couldn't see or breathe at all, so that all I knew was the stench of him and the power and the anger and the weight and the coarse grey bristles. And then, just this side of nothing, I smelt dog. Something in the pig changed. He lurched away from me,
and I rolled out from under him, and as the air rushed back into my lungs, I saw his yellow tusk close by my eye, and his raging pig eye glaring into mine, astonished, staring for one more second, as the smell of his blood blotted out the smell of my own. Serlo was there, and he had bitten deep where the blood flowed in the pig's neck, and let it out onto the grass, and with it the pig's life. Chapter 18. I hauled myself down into the old pig's lair, and lay there, panting. Now I began to feel where he had opened up my side with his iron trotters, and where his bulk had cracked my rib, and his shaking had bruised and battered me, and behind all that, the dull ache of my jaws from hanging on. Serlo lay down beside me and began to work on my wounds. He cleaned them thoroughly before he let me sleep. We were not short of meat for many days, and water wasn't far to find. Each morning I would drag myself down to a still, black pond under the trees, and lap the bitter, leaf-tasting water, and creep back to the boar's lair, which was mine and Serlo's now. Gradually my rib hurt less, and my side began to heal. I ate and drank and licked my wounds, and slept. I dreamt of Rufus several times. In my dreams I was younger, and we were out after rabbits. I'd be snapping and pouncing, swinging their warm little bodies up and across my shoulder, racing back with them to Rufus's open hand. Or I'd be rushing in to fetch the pigeons Rufus shot with his bow, fluttering feathered bodies dropped into Rufus's sack. It takes time for dog and a man to fit together, and it takes time for them to part. Slowly I said goodbye to him. Morning and evening Serlo hunted. Afterwards we dozed back to back, our limbs twitching companionably in remembered chase. Once I was strong enough to travel, we left the boar's lair and the boar's bones, and each day went a little further into the forest. We'd pick up the scent of something good, a little roe deer, ducks on a pond, a nest of mice, wood pigeons which feed on the ground and so love acorns you can stalk them while they fill their crops. We'd hunt and feed and find water and rest, and then move on, going always deeper. We did not try boar again. Each time we needed sleep, we'd choose the safest place the forest offered, creeping right into the centre of a mound of brushwood, squeezing in under fallen trees, once or twice wriggling into hollow logs, shaggy with moss. Once, from inside a nest of bracken, we watched a line of people pass by. They were dressed in green and brown and strung about with game and ale-skins and sacks. One of the children carried an owl on his wrist. They moved quietly, more quietly even than Rufus could, and they carried weapons, bows naturally, but also spears and swords. The oldest amongst them walked in the middle of the line and carried little, but all carried something, even the children, and all were quiet and alert. I had heard Rufus talk about such people. Forest people, he called them. They were outlaws, people who'd been caught poaching great house game, and could not, or would not, pay their fines mostly. They lived in the woods, hunting the king's deer, for which the punishment was death. Now and then a poor man in some village or another would wake to find a hare hung up behind his door, or a brace of wood pigeons, or some other gift to carry him over hard times. The lords and bishops sent soldiers out to catch them. They'd catch some and hang some, but they could never rule the forest as they ruled the farmlands, and they knew it. Serlo and I watched as the people passed.
They did not see us, but their dogs knew we were there. One or two snapped and snarled at us, but we lay still, and they left us alone. Time passed, and I could feel the season changing. Sap drained from wood down into earth, leaves crisped and yellowed. Sharp brown bracken spiked us if we were careless. In the mornings the air was cool and damp. At night mist hung over stream beds. Soon the frost would come, and after that the snow. Slowly, because I was still weak, Serlo took us deeper into the woods, beyond where any people roamed, towards his winter quarters. When we reached the place, I understood why he had thought it worth the journey. There was a narrow stream, and above it a hilltop. Halfway up, a knuckled rocky outcrop lifted clear above a golden sea of beech and birch. Brambles and holly and dagger-sharp butcher's broom guarded the rocks, which leaned against each other like the ruins of a house. Great slabs of stone, each with its own green pelt of moss and fern and lichen, jumbled one against the other. Hauling ourselves up this giant staircase, we came to an opening into the hill. Serlo sniffed around the entrance and trotted through. I followed. Set back down a narrow entranceway, with rock on all sides and sand under pad, was a hidden place. A warm, dry cave, private, sheltered, roofed in rock, buried in the hillside, from which we could look out and see for miles across the rolling woodland. Serlo's first breath had been drawn inside that cave. His first spring sunshine shone in through that rocky doorway. His first hunt started there. Generations of forest dogs had lived, and some had died, in the warm shelter of those rocks. People from time to time had hidden there and left their traces. A bone, a rag, an arrowhead. Bears for a while had taken it from dogs and left the marks of their claws in the rock. Wolves had whelped there. For many seasons it had been Serlo's place. Now it was mine as well. We wintered well there. Gales stripped the dead leaves from the trees. Frost spiked the grass. Snow fell, filling hollows, rounding stumps, blurring and flattening the edges of everything, destroying scent, making the hunting hard. But between us, we never went hungry for long. Mornings we ran down the hillside to drink and then to hunt. At sunset we sat together on the topmost rock, looking out over the land, watching the light wane and the shadows wax. By night we lay back to back, sharing our warmth. We never saw the forest people, but once at dusk we saw a red light in the valley and a trail of wood smoke, and crept down to look. There was a little fire of twigs, and beside it, crouched on a log she'd rolled up close to the flames, a woman sat toasting toadstools on a stick. Her hair was dark red, and it straggled down below the leather belt that held her rags together. Her skin was brown, and she was thin and bony, but strong-looking, with no taint of sickness on her. Dangling from her belt were odds and ends of dried fungus, touchwood, sharp white-beaked skulls of birds and small animals, half a dozen snakeskins, some yellow ends of deer horn, a bunch of withered roots, and several leather pouches. Rufus would have called her a witch. A woman like her came to our house once when Comfort was sick. She gave Comfort dried leaves to chew and something sour to drink. Rufus paid her with 2 tallow candles, and she went away before it got light. Serlo and I watched her eat her supper of yellow toadstools. When she had finished, she drank from the stream and washed, and then lay down beside her fire. She had not troubled to hide, and did not seem to fear the forest. She lay beside her fire and sang softly to herself, and presently she put her hands behind her head and watched the stars. Serlo and I were silent. When her fire was dying down, she leaned up on one elbow and threw a few more sticks on it, and then she turned and looked straight at us, as though she could see in the dark. "Dog people," she called quietly, "you can share my fire." Serlo would not, but I ran forward and pressed my nose into her hand, and thought of Comfort, and missed home. All night I lay beside her, and in the morning when she rose to go, I longed to follow her, but did not. I had already felt a change coming in my own body with the changing season. When spring began again and the blackthorn shone white and the streams unfroze, Serlo and I mated. By the time the tight-rolled buds of hawthorn blossom appeared, I was heavy and slow and thirsty all the time. I would drag myself down the hill to drink and drag myself back up, and by the time I reached the top I'd be thirsty again. Serlo brought me the first young rabbits and squirrels, thin from winter hibernation, and dormice, and once a hedgehog, though I found that too much trouble. When the time came for me to whelp, late on a spring evening, he stood guard at the mouth of the cave, with his curly black back to me, and his ears forward, and his big serious eyes scanning the distance, until he heard the first quiet whimper. Then he came to nose the puppy. There was only one, curly-haired, as soft and black as soot. I bit through his cord, cleaned him, fed him, and named him Blackthorn, for his black coat and his sharp teeth. Chapter 19. By the time Blackthorn had opened his eyes, serious eyes like his father's, and was ready to wobble out of the cave and down the hillside behind me, spring had turned to early summer, and the living was easy. That puppy was a natural hunter. He caught his first mouse when he was only 10 weeks old. It was followed by 2 fat squabs that had fallen from the nest and couldn't fly. Not long after that he nearly got caught himself. I thought he was with Serlo, and Serlo thought he was with me. When we realized neither of us had him, Serlo went off to nose along the banks of the stream, while I searched the beech woods where he'd found the squabs in case he'd gone back there looking for more. But he had not. I found him, crouched stock still beside a flat rock, his wet nose inches from the fat coils of an adder. Its forked tongue flicked up, then down. Its blank eyes stared right and left unwinking. They hunt by smell, not sight. It raised its head a little, tasting the warm scent of puppy, and Blackthorn drew back a fraction. The snake uncoiled just enough to keep him within striking distance. Blackthorn drew back again. The snake inched forward. Blackthorn whimpered. The snake hissed. Blackthorn began to tremble as those fixed eyes drew near. The forked tongue crept in and out, and the slow, fat coils shifted, slithering across the rock. Less of a dog would have run, but not far. I crept around the rock, slow as grass growing, quiet as leaves unfurling. The snake was watching Blackthorn. It did not see me. We were like 2 shadows moving, the snake and I, with Blackthorn still a stone between us. And all the time I moved. The snake moved too. I pulled back, drawing my weight down into my hindquarters. The snake drew back also, considering when to strike. Before it could do so, I leapt towards it, thumping the hard summer earth with my 4 paws, sending out such a storm of barking that Serlo heard me from beyond the stream and came bounding. The snake pulled back from Blackthorn and swung round to me. Serlo sent Blackthorn tumbling over and over on the grass, out of harm's way. The snake, seeing that the odds were against it now, poured itself down a crack in the rock and disappeared. Serlo and I had words with Blackthorn, several, about adders and their ways. Then we took him back to the cave and fed him on a young duck Serlo had taken from the stream bank. That summer was a hot one, but the cave was always cool. Once or twice, looking out at sunset across the treetops, with Blackthorn between us, Serlo and I saw smoke rising and tasted the ashy wood smoke scent of forest fires on the air. Once we saw light flickering red, but it was far off, and it did not threaten us. Down in the valley the stream dried to a trickle. Second and even third hatchings of young birds left their nests. Fawns grew too big to take easily. Summer began to turn. Blackthorn no longer needed me, and I began to think of comfort. On the morning that I left, I gave Blackthorn an extra good wash from head to tail and back again. I took a thorn out of Serlo's ear and went down to the stream to drink with him. When he turned back to Blackthorn and the cave, I went on down into the woods. 3 days later, I trotted into Edie's small yard and scratched at the door. Comfort came out with a child trotting beside her. Alice, of course, but she had grown so much I hardly knew her. There was a new little red-haired, smudge-faced baby tied to her back. She put down the wooden bucket she was carrying and bent to press her face into my neck. "Alice," she said. "Look, Alice, the old dog's back. I knew she'd come home." Alice nodded. She did not remember who I was. How could she? She was a baby when I left. Comfort, too, had changed. She was thin, painfully thin. Her hair was lank and wispy, and her dress was a rag. But the biggest change was in her face. She was disappearing behind her own hunger, her tiredness, and her sorrow. I should have come home sooner. She had lost almost everything when she lost Rufus. A third of everything she had went to the great house to pay Harriet against his death. After that there was mortuary to pay the priest, and then more payment to the great house for taking on Edie's little strips of land when Comfort's holding went to Miller Cudweed. That left her with very little of anything, which little the great house took another share of when Comfort was caught baking bread at home instead of in the great house bakery, as great house law requires. All this I learnt gradually as she spoke of it to Joan, her neighbour, when she sat by the fire with Alice beside her and the new child on her knee. All that she might have managed, she told Joan, because the forest people helped her with gifts of fish and flesh. But the reeve caught her grinding corn at home in a handmill, and the fine for that offence is heavy. If it was not, who would use the great house mill? Comfort could not pay it. Miller Cudweed said he would, from the kindness of his heart, pay the fine for her. Meanwhile he would take her 2 boys to work for him until such time as they had earned it out. That first night I stayed indoors with Comfort, curled at her feet, and Alice's, on Edie's old pallet. I nuzzled her cheek when she wept in her sleep, soothed Alice when she woke in the night from a dream. Early in the morning, before first light, I was out across the fields to the great house warren to catch a rabbit for their breakfast. They were famished, but they gave me my share. After breakfast we went up to the mill. Comfort went early every morning to catch a sight of her 2 boys before Cudweed was up. I dare say Beaton did what she could to protect her nephews from her husband's temper, but all the village knew that Beaton could not protect herself, let alone anybody else. Avens heard us in the yard and came snarling out at Comfort. He stopped short when he saw me, and I was glad to see that one of his ears was still ragged from my teeth. Wat and Will crept out of the storehouse where they slept. Comfort had saved them each a piece of rabbit. She told them to eat it quickly so as not to be caught with stolen meat. They would have anyway. They were starving. Wat limped from an injury to his foot, and Will was bruised about the face. They were grey with dirt and hunger, and they smelt like the ragman. Comfort embraced them both, holding them tight against her chest. The boys said they had known I would come back, and that I looked fine and fat, and that I must have eaten several of the king's deer, and that times would be better now that I was home to hunt. Will Cudweed came out then with a stick in his hand, and the boys ran into the mill. He looked across the muddy yard to Comfort and laughed. "Lazy little beggars your boys are," he remarked. "Hardly worth my while to feed 'em." "And I see you hardly do," Comfort replied. Will Cudweed frowned. "I see you've got my son's bitch whining round you," he said. "Lupus will want her back. You take her round to him. Do it today."
He turned and went indoors. Comfort swore and shook her head. Alice reached up and tucked one hand into her mother's. "You'd best run on, old dog," Comfort said. "No sense in letting Lupus take you. You go on back to wherever you've been living. Looks like it suits you well enough." I did not go. How could I leave Comfort? Lupus came for me that evening with a rope in his hand and took me away. That night, back in the byre that had once belonged to Rufus, I howled and barked and howled again. Lupus came out and hit me for it, but I would not stop. A long howl answered from over the hill. Swart, maybe. I caught Fleabane's voice, and then another from over the next hill, and so on and around, up and down the valleys, back and forth, until all of them gave tongue with me to comfort suffering. Chapter 20. On a night when I had seen nothing but the dark inside of the byre for many days, and the place stank, and I longed for light and air and freedom, I heard Serlo's deep baying from somewhere on the hills, and I bit through my rope and ran off. It was a wild night, a wet night, a night of low cloud with the wind driving in from the west. Serlo and Blackthorn were hunting up on the hill. I smelt them before I heard them, and I heard them before I saw them. Blackthorn had grown into a fine young dog since I last saw him in the springtime. They were eating a hare when I caught up with them. I had some too. Then we ran down to the village with Blackthorn out ahead of us, jumping and barking at shadows. We ran on, snuffing up the wet, wild smell of autumn, and presently we found ourselves hunting along the river banks. Avens ran out to bark at us. We were old enemies, me and Avens, but that night was different. That night we were the start of a pack. We ran past the priest's house at the back of the church, and the priest's bitch ran out yipping. Filbert came up from the great house yard, and then Fleabane was with us. We ran on, 7 of us, and fetched up by Miller Cudweed's yard. The rain smacked down on my back, and the wind blew it into my eyes and up my nose and down my ears. It was joyous, joyous to be out on such a night, free of the stink of dirty straw. I put my head back and threw a long yowl of delight into the hungry storm. It was lost in the thunder of the mill race. The river was in spate, full to the brim and roaring down between its banks, frothing to the very top of the watercourse that fed the mill pond and the great mill wheel. I bit Blackthorn when he ran towards it, drawn by the rush and tumble. Nothing could live that fell in there. The mill door opened, and Cudweed stumbled out, shaking his head. He looked as if he had been drinking, but it may have been the wind that made him stagger. He shambled across the muddy yard and fell in at the barn door. Next Wat and Will came stumbling out. Cudweed pointed to the floodgates on the sluice beside the mill pool, shouted something, then went back into the mill and shut the door behind him. Wat and Will were small boys, light at the best of times, and lighter by far since they had come to work for Cudweed. They bent double and held on tight to one another as they pushed across the yard, their bare feet slapping in the mud and puddles. Their faces, when the glow from the mill window lit them, were pale and frightened-looking. I licked their hands and tried to nose them back towards the barn. Wat pushed me away. "Leave us be, old dog!" he shouted above the noise of wind and water. "We have to do what Miller says. You can come in the barn with us when we've finished." I growled and stood my ground. Wat looked surprised. "Old dog's forgotten us," he hollered. Will shook his head. "Can't have." Wat turned towards the mill race, and I showed him my teeth. "She won't bite, Wat. She never bit." "She might bite. She's Lupus's dog now, Will." She might and she might not. But Cudweed will beat us if we don't shift the sluice gate, Will yelled. He pushed me out of the way and tottered over towards the water's roar, pulling Wat behind him. I watched as they walked along the mill pond bank. Rufus had repaired that bank time out of mind with turves and clay. It looked silky smooth, slippery and slick, with the rain running off it. The water was almost up to the top, solid and hard, like the inside of a flintstone. It seemed to arch a little, like the neck of Mullane, the great house horse. Wat and Will reached the sluice gates and bent over them. Cudweed came out and yelled at them to hurry. It was obvious that they had not the strength to shift the gates, but they dared not stop trying. Wat slipped once. Will caught him and jerked him back before the water took him. Cudweed shouted again and shook his stick. His cloak rose up like wings around his shoulders. His hood blew off and flew across the yard. It barely touched the surface of the water before it was sucked under. Wat and Will watched, terrified. They had not understood, till then, the power of the water that raced past their feet. There was a soft slither, and part of the bank beside them slid into the mill pool. They turned from the sluice gates and looked back at me. They knew they must get off the bank, but they dared not take a step. They leaned in towards one another, bent over in the wind. Will shut his eyes. The bank was breaking up on both sides of them now. They stood on a small headland with the black road of the water whirling past on either side. Rufus came to me then, as clear as anything, standing beside me, smiling down, his strong hand stretched to scratch behind my ear. I trotted over to the boys. Wat put his hand down to my neck. Will held tightly to his brother's shoulder and walked behind him, keeping his eyes shut. I kept mine on Serlo, who stood watching in the shadows. When we got back off the headland, Rufus was gone. Both boys crouched down to embrace me. Miller Cudweed flung himself towards us, bawling, his stick lifted high over his head. He brought it down once on my back and lifted it again for Will. The next blow never fell. Serlo came round the corner of the barn, growling low down and murderous in his chest. Cudweed swung round to face him, with his back to the water. Serlo lowered his head, his black mane rose, and his lips curled back off his long, strong teeth. Cudweed began to back away. Serlo crept forward. Cudweed stepped back. Serlo came on, until by and by the breath of the river's rushing iron back raised the hair on the miller's neck, and the thunder of it must have roared inside his head, and he was forced to set his heel on the very lip of the mill race. He stopped there, caught. Serlo stopped too. He had forgotten all about the mill race. He thought only of Cudweed and the stick and how to bring them both down to the ground and savage them. He settled back and gathered in the power of his muscles to spring. Cudweed saw it, stepped back, and vanished. Serlo checked his spring, confused and angry. We stared downstream. Beyond the mill race, something broke the surface of the torrent for a moment, spluttered, and was gone. High in the mill, Beaton's white face looked down. Chapter 21. The boys ran into the barn. I sat by Serlo and we stared at the water. 2 sets of prints in the mud, man and dog, led to the water's edge. The miller's footprints ended there. Only Serlo's heavy prints tracked back into the yard. Avon stayed in the mill yard, whimpering. The worst of the spate was over and the storm was dying. Filbert had business elsewhere, and the priest's bitch ran home. Serlo, Blackthorn, Fleabane, and I hunted on down the riverbank, while the light rose softly, and the church bell rang, and men plodded out into the fields to work. Fleabane stayed with us as far as the bridge, where we caught 3 ducks made foolish by the spate, and ate them. Then he was off to his farm, with nothing but a few brown feathers caught in his fur to show for the night's work.
He's a fine dog, Fleabane. Serlo and Blackthorn ran up into the woods. I followed them. We stayed up there, hunting together, sleeping wherever we could find shelter. One night, when the feel of summer was just turning to autumn, we found a place to rest, inside the shelter of a fallen tree. Bracken had grown up through its branches, and the ground beneath was soft. We lay together in a wet heap and slept the morning through. I was the first to wake. I felt the weight of Serlo's great head resting on my flank. Curled at my back, Blackthorn snuffled. Something was coming through the wood. Something heavy with 4 feet. The wind swung round a little, and a rich pig smell streamed down to my nose. Grindycob! Mighty Grindycob, tripping through the midday woods on her neat, sharp trotters. She stopped to snout leisurely through the undergrowth, found what she was after, and began to chew. She looked bigger, heavier, stronger, halfway between tame and wild. Life in the woods had done her proud. I watched her on her way, stopping every now and then to root and chew. Soon after she had gone, Serlo woke and shook himself. His ears and jowls flapped as he shook. He squeezed and sniffed the air. I knew what he was smelling with his big black nose. The coming winter. Ice on the streams, frost on the ground, snow and hard hunting. A stream, a hill, a knuckled rocky outcrop. A dry bed in a safe place high up, with the wolf and the bear for neighbours. He ran over to the leaves where Grindicob's snout had left a fat, sweet smell. He snuffed at it a moment, but soon left it and set his face to the heart of the wood. Blackthorn got up and followed after. I trotted behind. The cave was my home, too. Presently we crossed a place where Grindicob had made a den, and her rich scent pulled me to a stop. Serlo and Blackthorn paused, waiting for me to follow them. The dry bed and the safe place, the wolf and the bear for neighbours, all called me away to follow them. Grindicob's scent called me back, speaking to me of fire, bed and bone. I looked long and deep into Serlo's dark eyes before I turned my back on the wildwood and took the path down to the village. Serlo shook himself once more and headed off his own way. Blackthorn went with him. When I got down to the village, I found Edie's old place empty and deserted, though it still smelt of home. One worn-out shoe of Alice's lay in the corner. That was all. I turned and ran into the village. There I met Wat and Will struggling with a particularly stubborn goat. "Where have you been, old dog?" Wat asked. "We thought you must have fallen in the river." Will dodged the goat's butting forehead. "Oh, nip her, old dog," he begged. "Mother wants her and she won't come with us. We're going to live in our old house again. Aunt Beaton has chased Lupus away." I did as Will asked, and together we scurried down the lane. "Old dog's back!" they shouted when we got to the house. Alice came pelting out with Comfort behind her, and the new baby bouncing on her back. Beaton was there as well, her face smooth and serene. I think it was the first time that I ever saw her without bruises. It was hard for me to go inside the house. It held memories for me of cruelty, where once had been such deep kindness. But Comfort called me to my old place beside the fire pit. She told me that the house was hers again, and I, her dog. Beaton had cleared out Lupus and his wife Vetchen and all their things that very morning. She had swept the place clean for Comfort and spread fresh bracken on the floor. She had put bread on the table and milk in a jug. 2 sleek goats bleated already from Grindicob's old stall, and a flock of chickens brought down from the mill scratched in the yard. Presently Comfort stopped tidying, and sat down on the old bench, and wept with relief. Beaton sat down too and put her arm around her sister. "The mill belongs to me now," she said. "Lupus can grumble all he likes. I shall do as I please, and it pleases me to share my good luck with you. If the Lord of the Great House does not keep me in the mill, I shall live here with you. Will you let me?" Comfort smiled and nodded. "I have money enough for both of us, whatever happens now," Beaton promised. That winter was an easy one, the first Comfort had ever known. She had her children round her and food on the table every day.
There was ale in the barrel and warm new clothes for everyone. Humble came back and took her place by the fire. Grindikob did not. The new baby thrived. She had wispy red hair that was just starting to thicken and shine. Comfort said Rufus's had been just that shade of fiery red before the years turned it to white. The very colour that I saw when first I passed his door and saw him working in the garden, she would tell me, running her hand over the baby's smooth, round head. I wintered at home with Comfort. In the spring I made one more journey to the stony hill. Blackthorn had moved on. I hunted there with Serlo until I tired and dreamed of Comfort calling me, and left him. I felt old, older than anything when I got back home. I lay in the dusty yard and scratched my fleas and let my mind drift back over the years. White hairs grow in my yellow pelt, and my joints stiffen. My teeth are wearing down slowly, like the turning of the year. Each year at the end of the summer I think back, remembering all my children. Fleabane has come back from Swart's farm, but tonight he is not with me. I think he has some business with a young bitch in the village. The moon is hidden behind heavy rain clouds, and the night is dark and quiet. Humble the grey cat hunts for mice out on the meadow. My first litter was of 3, but only one was strong enough to live. I fed the others for a day, but I could feel by the soft, hopeless drag of their small jaws that they would not suck hard enough to live. My next came a long while later, because Rufus kept me shut up each time I might have got another litter. He said I should not breed again too quickly. That way, he said, more of my puppies would thrive. There were 4 when they came, 1 daughter and 3 sons. Fine children, all of them, but quarrelsome, as I remember. Then came Squill, my small black son, and Parsnip, my yellow daughter, lost both to the wildcat, and 2-colour Fleabane, who is with me yet, and Blackthorn, Serlo's son. I lie out in the yard, listening to Comfort. In my heart I hear messages from the past, messages of small, plump wrigglers, and scrawny squabblers, wet-nosed nuzzlers, blind-eyed, wet-furred, helpless scraps. Some stay, and grow, and flourish, and some fade. It takes a lot of puppies to make one dog.
That was Fire, Bed and Bone by Henrietta Branford. Read by Eve Karpf.